Chapter 1. An Offer and a Gift. And, forward, bellowed Marshal Varus. Jezal lurched at him, toes curling round the edges of the beam, trying desperately to keep his balance, making a clumsy lunge or two, just to give the impression of his heart being in 4 hours of training a day were taking their toll on him, and he felt beyond mere exhaustion. Varus frowned and flicked Jezal's blunted steel aside, moving effortlessly along the beam as though it was a garden path. And back! Jezal stumbled back on his heels, left arm waving stupidly around him in an attempt to keep his balance. Everything above his knees was aching terribly from the effort. Below the knees it was much, much worse. Varus was over 60, but he showed no signs of fatigue. He wasn't even sweating as he danced forward down the beam, swishing his steels around. Jezal himself was gasping for air as he parried desperately with his left hand, badly off balance, his right foot fishing in space for the safety of the beam behind him. And forward, Jezal's calves were agony as he stumbled to change his direction and shove a blow at the infuriating old man. But Varus did not move back. Instead, he ducked under the despairing cut and used the back of his arm to sweep Jezal's feet away. Jezal let out a howl as the courtyard turned over around him. His legs smacked painfully against the edge of the beam. Then he sprawled on his face on the grass, chin thumping into the turf and making his teeth rattle. He rolled a short distance, then lay there on his back, gasping like a fish snatched suddenly from the water, leg throbbing where it had collided with the beam on his way down. He would have yet another ugly bruise in the morning. "Awful, Jezal, awful," cried the old soldier as he sprang nimbly down onto the lawn. "You teeter about the beam, as though it were a tightrope." Jezal rolled over, cursing, and started to climb stiffly to his feet. "It is a solid piece of oak, wide enough to get lost in." The Lord Marshal illustrated his point by whacking at the beam with his short steel, making splinters fly. "I thought you said forward," moaned Jezal. Varus' eyebrows went up sharply. "Do you seriously suppose, Captain Luthar, that Brima Dan Gorst gives his opponents reliable information as to his intentions? Brima Dan Gorst will be trying to beat me, you old shit." "You are supposed to be helping me to beat him!" That was what Jezal thought, but he knew better than to say it. He just shook his head dumbly. No, indeed he does not. He makes every effort to deceive and confuse his opponents, as all great swordsmen must. The Lord Marshal paced up and down, shaking his head. Jezal considered again whether to give it all up. He was sick of falling into bed exhausted each night, at a time when he should have been just starting to get drunk. He was sick of waking up every morning, bruised and aching, to face another 4 interminable hours of running, beam, bar, forms. He was sick of being knocked on his arse by Major West. Most of all, he was sick of being bullied by this old fool, a depressing display captain, very depressing. "I do believe you are actually getting worse." Jezal would never win the contest. No one expected him to, himself least of all. So why not give it up and go back to his cards and late nights? Wasn't that all he really wanted from life? But then what would mark him out from 1,000 other noble younger sons? He had decided long ago that he wanted to be something special. A Lord Marshal himself, perhaps, and then Lord Chamberlain, something big and important anyway. He wanted a big chair on the closed council, and to make big decisions. He wanted people to fawn and smile around him and hang on his every word. He wanted people to whisper, "There goes Lord Luthar," as he swept past. Could he be happy being forever a richer, cleverer, better-looking version of Lieutenant Brent? It was not to be thought of. We have a terribly long way to go, and not enough time to get there. Not unless you change your attitude. Your sparring is lamentable, your stamina is still weak, and as for your balance, the less said about that the better. And what would everyone else think if he gave up? What would his father do? What would his brothers say? What about the other officers? He would look a coward. And then there was Arde West. She seemed to have been much on his mind during the past couple of days. Would she lean so close to him if he didn't fence? Would she talk to him in such soft tones? Would she laugh at his jokes? Would she look up at him with those big dark eyes, so he could almost feel her breath on his face? "Are you listening, boy?" "Yes, sir." "Sparring lamentable. Stamina weak." Jezal swallowed nervously. "Less said about balance the better." "That's right. I am beginning to think, though I can hardly believe it after the trouble you have put me to, that your heart really isn't in this." He glared into Jezal's eyes. "What do you think, Major?" There was no reply. West was slumped in his chair, arms folded, frowning grimly and staring into space. Major West snapped the Lord Marshal. He looked up suddenly, as though he had only just become aware of their presence. "I'm sorry, sir. I had become distracted, so I see." Varus sucked his teeth. "It seems that nobody has been concentrating this morning." It was a great relief that some of the old man's anger had been deflected elsewhere, but Jezal's happiness was not long-lived. "Very well," snapped the old marshal. "If that's the way you want it, starting tomorrow we will begin each session with a swim in the moat. A mile or two should do it." Jezal squeezed his teeth together to keep from screaming. "Cold water has a wonderful way of sharpening the senses, and perhaps we need to start a little earlier, to catch you in your most receptive frame of mind. That means we begin at 5. In the meantime, Captain Luthar, I suggest that you consider whether you are here in order to win the contest, or simply for the pleasure of my company." And he turned on his heel and stalked off. Jezal waited until Varus had left the courtyard before losing his temper, but once he was sure the old man was out of earshot, he flung his steels against the wall in a fury. "Damn it!" he shouted, as the swords rattled to the ground. "Shit!" He looked around for something to kick that wouldn't hurt too much. His eye lighted on the leg of the beam, but he misjudged the kick badly, and had to stifle the urge to grab his bruised foot and hop around like an idiot. Shit, he raged. West was disappointingly unimpressed. He got up, frowning, and made to follow Marshal Varus. "Where are you off to?" asked Jezal. "Away," said West over his shoulder. "I've seen enough." "What does that mean?" West stopped and turned to face him. "Amazing though it may seem, there are bigger problems in the world than this." Jezal stood there open-mouthed as West stalked from the courtyard. "Just who do you think you are?" he shouted after him, once he was sure he was gone. Shit! He considered giving the beam another kick, but thought better of it. Jezal was in a foul mood on his way back to his quarters, so he stayed away from the busier parts of the Agrient, sticking to the quieter lanes and gardens to the side of the Kingsway. He glowered down at his feet as he walked, to further discourage any social encounter. But luck was not on his side. Jezal, it was Caspa, out for a stroll with a yellow-haired girl in expensive clothes. They had a severe-looking middle-aged woman with them, no doubt the girl's governess or some such. They had stopped to admire some piece of minor sculpture in the little-visited yard. There was no avoiding them. He plastered an unconvincing smile onto his face and stalked over. The pale girl smiled at him as he approached, but if he was meant to be charmed, he didn't feel it. "Been fencing again, Luthar?" asked Caspa pointlessly. Jezal was sweating and holding a pair of fencing steels. It was well known that he fenced every morning. You didn't need a fine mind to make the connection, which was fortunate because Caspa certainly didn't have one. "Yes. How did you guess?" Jezal hadn't meant to kill the conversation quite so dead, but he passed it off with a false chuckle, and the smiles of the ladies soon returned. Laughed Caspa, ever willing to be the butt of a joke. "Jezal, may I introduce my cousin, the Lady Aris Dan Caspa? This is my superior officer, Captain Luthar, so this was the famous cousin. One of the Union's richest heiresses and from an excellent family." Caspa was always babbling about what a beauty she was, but to Jezal she seemed a pale, skinny, sickly-looking thing. She smiled weakly and offered out her limp, white hand. He brushed it with the most perfunctory of kisses. "Charmed," he muttered, without relish. "I must apologize for my appearance. I've just been fencing." "Yes," she squeaked, in a high, piping voice, once she was sure he had finished speaking. "I have heard you are a great fencer." There was a pause while she groped for something to say. Then her eyes lit up. "Tell me, Captain, is fencing really very dangerous? What insipid drivel." "Oh, no, my lady, we only use blunted steels in the circle." He could have said more, but he was damned if he was going to make all the effort. He gave a thin smile, so did she. The conversation hovered over the abyss. Jezal was about to make his excuses, the subject of fencing evidently exhausted, but Aris cut him off by blundering onto another topic. "And tell me, Captain, is there really likely to be a war in the north? Her voice had almost entirely faded away by the end of the sentence, but the chaperone stared on approvingly, no doubt delighted by the conversational skills of her charge. "Spare us." "Well, it seems to me," Jezal began. The pale blue eyes of Lady Aris stared back at him expectantly. Blue eyes are absolute crap, he reflected. He wondered which subject she was more ignorant of, fencing or politics. "What do you think?" The chaperone's brow furrowed slightly. Lady Aris looked somewhat taken aback, blushing slightly as she groped for words. "Well, that is to say, I'm sure that everything will turn out well." "Thank the fates," thought Jezal. "We are saved." He had to get out of here. "Of course, everything will turn out well." He forced out one more smile. "It has been a real pleasure to make your acquaintance, but I'm afraid I'm on duty shortly, so I must leave you." He bowed with frosty formality. "Lieutenant Kaspa, Lady Aris." Kaspa clapped him on the arm, as friendly as ever. His ignorant waif of a cousin smiled uncertainly. The governess frowned at him as he passed, but Jezal took no notice. He arrived at the Lord's Round just as the council members were returning from their lunchtime recess. He acknowledged the guards in the vestibule with a terse nod, then strode through the enormous doorway and down the central aisle. A straggling column of the greatest peers of the realm were hard on his heels, and the echoing space was full of shuffling footsteps, grumblings and whisperings, as Jezal made his way around the curved wall to his place behind the high table. "Jezal, how was fencing?" It was Jalenhorm, here early for once, and seizing on the opportunity to talk before the Lord Chamberlain arrived. "I've had better mornings. Yourself?" "Oh, I've been having a fine time. I met that cousin of Caspa's, you know." He searched for the name. Jezal sighed. "Lady Aris. Yes, that's it. Have you seen her?" "I was lucky enough to run into them just now." "Phoo!" exclaimed Jalenhorm, pursing his lips. "Isn't she stunning?" Jezal looked away, bored, and watched the robed and fur-trimmed worthies file slowly to their places. At least he watched a sample of their least favorite sons and paid representatives. Very few of the magnates turned up in person for open council these days. Not unless they had something significant to complain about. A lot of them didn't even bother to send someone in their place. I swear, one of the finest-looking girls I ever saw. I know Caspa's always raving about her, but he didn't do her justice. The councillors began to spread out, each man towards his own seat. The Lord's Round was designed like a theater, the unions leading noblemen sitting where the audience would be, on a great half-circle of banked benches with an aisle down the center. As in the theater, some seats were better than others. The least important sat high up at the back, and the occupant's significance increased as you came forward. The front row was reserved for the heads of the very greatest families, or whoever they sent in their stead. Representatives from the south, from Dagaska and Westport, were on the left, nearest to Jezal. On the far right were those from the north and west, from Angland and Sterikland. The bulk of the seating in between was for the old nobility of Midderland, the heart of the Union proper, as they would have seen it, as Jezal saw it too, for that matter. What poise, what grace! Jalenhorm was rhapsodizing. That wonderful fair hair, that milky white skin, those fantastic blue eyes, and all of that money. "Well, yes, that too," smiled the big man. "Kaspa says his uncle is even richer than his father. Imagine that. And he has just the one child. She will inherit every mark of it. Every mark." Jalenhorm could scarcely contain his excitement. "It's a lucky man that can bag her." "What was her name again?" "Aris," said Jezal sourly. The lords or their proxies had all shuffled and grumbled their way to their seats. It was a poor attendance. The benches were less than half full. That was about as full as it ever got. If the Lord's Round really had been a theatre, its owners would have been desperately in search of a new play. Aris. Jalenhorm smacked his lips as though the name left a sweet taste. "It's a lucky man that gets her. Yes, indeed. A lucky man. Providing he prefers cash to conversation, that is." Jezal thought he might have preferred to marry the governess. At least she had seemed to have a bit of backbone. The Lord Chamberlain had entered the hall now, and was making his way towards the dais on which the high table stood, just about where the stage would have been, had the round been a theatre. He was followed by a gaggle of black-gowned secretaries and clerks, each man more or less encumbered with heavy books and sheaves of official-looking papers. With his crimson robes of state flapping behind him, Lord Hoff looked like nothing so much as a rare and stately gliding bird, pursued by a flock of troublesome crows. "Here comes old Vinegar," whispered Jalenhorn, as he sidled off to find his place on the other side of the table. Jezal put his hands behind his back and struck the usual pose, feet a little spread, chin high in the air. He swept an eye over the soldiers, regularly spaced around the curved wall, but each man was motionless and perfectly presented in full armor, as always. He took a deep breath and prepared himself for several hours of the most extreme tedium. The Lord Chamberlain threw himself into his tall chair and called for wine. The secretaries took their places around him, leaving a space in the center for the king, who was absent as usual. Documents were rustled, great ledgers were heaved open, pens were sharpened and rattled in ink wells. The announcer walked to the end of the table and struck his staff of office on the floor for order. The whispering of the noblemen and their proxies, and that of the few attendees in the public gallery over their heads, gradually died down, leaving the vast chamber silent. The announcer puffed out his chest. "I call this meeting," he said, in slow and sonorous tones, as though he were giving the eulogy, at a funeral, of the Open Council of the Union. He gave an unnecessarily long and significant pause. The Lord Chamberlain's eyes flicked angrily towards him. But the announcer was not to be robbed of his moment of glory. He made everyone wait an instant longer before finishing. "To order!" "Thank you," said Hoff sourly. "I believe we were about to hear from the Lord Governor of Dagasta before we were interrupted by luncheon." The scratching nibs of quills accompanied his voice, as two clerks recorded his every word. The faint echoes of the pens merged with the echoes of his words in the great space above. An elderly man struggled to his feet in the front row close to Jezal, some papers clasped before him in shaky hands. "The Open Council," droned the announcer, as ponderously as he dared, "recognizes Rush Dan Fuel, accepted proxy of Sandan Verms, the Lord Governor of Dagasta." "Thank you, sir." Fuel's cracking, wispy voice was absurdly small in the vast space. It barely carried as far as Jezal, and he was no more than 10 strides away. "My lords," he began. "Speak up," called someone from the back. There was a ripple of laughter. The old man cleared his throat and tried again. "My lords, I come before you with an urgent message from the Lord Governor of Dagasta." His voice had already faded to its original barely audible level, each word accompanied by the persistent scratching of quills. Whispers began to emanate from the public gallery above, making it still harder to hear him. "The threat posed to that great city by the Emperor of Gurkhul increases with every passing day." Vague sounds of disapproval began to float up from the far side of the room, where the representatives from England were seated, but the bulk of the councillors simply looked bored. "Attacks on shipping, harassment of traders and demonstrations beyond our walls have compelled the Lord Governor to send me—" "Lucky us!" somebody shouted. There was another wave of laughter, slightly louder this time. "The city is built on but a narrow peninsula," persisted the old man, straining to make himself heard over the increasing background noise, "attached to a land controlled entirely by our bitter enemies, the Gurkish, and separated from Mitterland by wide leagues of salt water. Our defenses are not all they might be. The Lord Governor is sorely in need of more funds." The mention of funds brought instant uproar from the assembly. Tool's mouth was still moving, but there was no chance of hearing him now. The Lord Chamberlain frowned and took a swallow from his goblet. The clerk furthest from Jezal had laid down his quill and was rubbing his eyes with his inky thumb and forefinger. The clerk closest had just finished writing a line. Jezal craned forward to see. It said simply, "Some shouting here." The announcer thumped his staff on the tiles with a look of great self-satisfaction. The hubbub eventually died down, but Thule had now been taken with a coughing fit. He tried to speak, but was unable. And eventually he waved his hand and sat down, very red in the face, while his neighbor thumped him on the back. "If I may, Lord Chamberlain," shouted a fashionable young man in the front row on the other side of the hall, leaping to his feet. The scratching of the quills began once again. "It seems to me, the Open Council," cut in the announcer, "recognizes Hercel Dan Mead, third son, an accepted proxy of Fedor Dan Mead, the Lord Governor of England." "It seems to me," continued the handsome young man, only slightly annoyed by this interruption, that our friends in the south are forever expecting a full-scale attack by the Emperor. Dissenting voices were now raised on the other side of the room. An attack which never materializes. Did we not defeat the Gurkish only a few short years ago, or does my memory deceive me? The booing increased in volume. This scaremongering represents an unacceptable drain on the Union's resources. He was shouting to be heard. In England we have many miles of border and too few soldiers, while the threat from Bethard and his Northmen is very real. If anyone is in need of funds, the shouting was instantly redoubled. Cries of, "Hear, hear," "Nonsense," "True," and lies could be vaguely made out over the hubbub. Several of the representatives were on their feet, shouting. Some vigorously nodded their agreement. Some violently shook their heads in dissent. Others yawned and stared around. Jezal could see one fellow, near to the back in the center, who was almost certainly asleep and in imminent danger of slumping into his neighbor's lap. He allowed his eyes to wander up, over the faces ranged around the rail of the public gallery. He felt a strange tugging in his chest. R.D. West was up there, looking straight down at him. As their eyes met, she smiled and waved. He was smiling himself, with his arm halfway up to wave, when he remembered where he was. He pushed his arm behind his back and looked around nervously, but was relieved to find that no one important had noticed his mistake. The smile would not quite leave his face, though. "My lords," roared the Lord Chamberlain, smashing his empty goblet down on the high table. He had the loudest voice Jezal had ever heard. Even Marshal Varuz could have learned a thing or two about shouting from Hoff. The sleeping man near the back started up, sniffing and blinking. The noise died away almost immediately. Those representatives left standing looked around guiltily, like naughty children called to account, and gradually sat down. The whispers from the public gallery went still. Order was restored. "My lords, I can assure you, the king has no more serious concern than the safety of his subjects. No matter where they are, the Union does not permit aggression against its people or property." Hoff punctuated each comment by smashing his fist down in front of him. From the Emperor of Gurkel, from these savages in the north, or from anyone else. He struck the table so hard on this last comment that ink splashed from a well and ran all over one of the clerk's carefully prepared documents. Calls of agreement and support greeted the Lord Chamberlain's patriotic display. As for the specific circumstance of Dagorska, Thule looked up hopefully, chest still shaking with suppressed coughs. Is that city not possessed of some of the most powerful and extensive defenses in the world? Did it not resist a siege by the Gurkish less than a decade ago for over a year? What has become of the walls, sir, the walls? The great room fell quiet as everyone strained to hear the reply. Lord Chamberlain, wheezed Thule, his voice nearly drowned out as one of the clerks turned the crackling page of his huge book and began scratching on the next. The defenses have fallen into poor repair, and we lack the soldiers to keep them there, properly manned. The Emperor is not ignorant of this, he whispered, all but inaudible. I beg of you. He dissolved into another fit of coughing and dropped into his seat, accompanied by some light jeering from the Anglian delegation. Hoff frowned even more deeply. It was my understanding that the defenses of the city were to be maintained by monies raised locally, and by trade levies upon the Honorable Guild of Spicers, who have operated in Dagorska under an exclusive and highly profitable license these past 7 years. If resources cannot be found even to maintain the walls, and he swept the assembly with a dark eye, perhaps it is time that this license was put out to tender. There was a volley of angry mutterings around the public gallery. In any case, the Crown can spare no extra monies at present. Jeers of dissatisfaction came from the Dagorska side of the room, hoots of agreement from the Anglian side. As for the specific circumstance of England, thundered the Lord Chamberlain, turning toward Meade, I believe we may shortly hear some good news for you to take back to your father, the Lord Governor. A cloud of excited whisperings rose up into the gilded dome above. The handsome young man looked pleasantly surprised, as well he might. It was rare indeed that anyone took good news away from the open council, or news of any kind, for that matter. Thule had got control of his lungs once more, and he opened his mouth to speak, but he was interrupted by a great beating on the huge door behind the high table. The lords looked up, surprised, expectant. The Lord Chamberlain smiled, in the manner of a magician who has just pulled off an exceptionally difficult trick. 8 knights of the body, encased in glittering armor, faceless behind high, polished helmets, resplendent in purple cloaks, marked on the back with a golden sun, stomped in unison down the steps, and took their places to either side of the high table. They were closely followed by 4 trumpeters, who stepped smartly forward, raised their shining instruments to their lips, and blew an ear-splitting fanfare. Jezal gritted his rattling teeth and narrowed his eyes, but eventually the ringing echoes faded. The Lord Chamberlain turned angrily toward the announcer, who was staring at the new arrivals with his mouth open.
"Well,"
hissed Hoff. The announcer jumped to life. "Ah, yes, of course. My lords and ladies, I have the great honor to present." He paused and took a huge breath. His Imperial Highness, the King of England, of Sterikland, and of Nederland, the Protector of Westport and of Dagaska, His August Majesty, Guslav V, High King of the Union. There was a great rustling noise as every man and woman in the hall shifted from their seats and down onto one knee. The royal palanquin processed slowly through the doors, carried on the shoulders of 6 more faceless knights. The king was sitting in a gilded chair on top, propped up on rich cushions and swaying gently from side to side. He was staring about him with the startled expression of a man who went to sleep drunk and has woken up in an unfamiliar room. He looked awful, enormously fat, lolling like a great hill swathed in fur and red silk, head squashed into his shoulders by the weight of the great, sparkling crown. His eyes were glassy and bulging, with huge dark bags hanging beneath, and the pink point of his tongue kept flicking nervously over his pale lips. He had great low jowls and a roll of fat around his neck. In fact, his whole face gave the appearance of having slightly melted and started to run down off his skull. Such was the High King of the Union. But Jezal bowed his head a little lower as the palanquin approached, just the same. "Oh," muttered His August Majesty, as though he had forgotten something, "please rise." The rustling noise filled the hall again as everybody rose and returned to their seats. The king turned toward Hoff, brow deeply furrowed, and Jezal heard him say, "Why, I hear the Northmen, your Majesty." "Oh yes." The king's eyes lit up. He paused. "What about them?" But the Lord Chamberlain was saved from replying by the opening of the doors on the opposite side of the hall, the ones through which Jezal had first entered. 2 strange men strode through and advanced down the aisle. One was a grizzled old warrior with a scar and a blind eye carrying a flat wooden box. The other was cloaked and hooded, every feature hidden, and so big that he made the whole hall seem out of proportion. The benches, the tables, even the guards, all suddenly looked like small versions designed for the use of children. As he passed, a couple of the representatives closest to the aisle cringed and shuffled away. Jezal frowned to himself. This hooded giant did not have the look of good news, whatever Lord Hoff might say. Angry and suspicious mutterings filled the echoing dome as the 2 Northmen took their places on the tiled floor before the high table. "Your Majesty," said the announcer, bowing so ridiculously low that he had to support himself with his staff. "The Open Council recognizes Fenris the Feared, the envoy of Bethod, King of the Northmen, and his translator, White-Eye Hansel." The king was staring off happily towards one of the great windows in the curved wall, utterly oblivious, perhaps admiring the way the light shone through the beautiful stained glass. But he looked suddenly round, jowls vibrating, as the old half-blind warrior addressed him. "Your Majesty, I bring brotherly greetings from my master Bethod, King of the Northmen." The round had fallen very still, and the clerk's scratching nib seemed absurdly loud. The old warrior nodded at the great hooded shape beside him with an awkward smile. "Fenris the Feared brings an offer from Bethod to yourself, from king to king, from the North to the Union. An offer and a gift." And he raised the wooden box. The Lord Chamberlain gave a self-satisfied smirk. "Speak your offer first. It is an offer of peace, an endless peace between our 2 great nations." White-Eye bowed again. His manners were impeccable, Jezal had to admit. Not what one would expect from savages of the cold and distant north. His goodly speech would almost have been enough to put the room at ease, had it not been for the hooded man beside him, looming like a dark shadow. The king's face twitched into a weak smile at this mention of peace, however. "Good," he muttered. "Excellent. Peace. Capital. Peace is good. "He asks but one small thing in return," said White-Eye. The Lord Chamberlain's face had turned suddenly dour, but it was too late. "He has but to name it," said the king, smiling indulgently. The hooded man stepped forward. "Angland," he hissed. There was a moment of stillness, then the hall exploded with noise. There was a gale of disbelieving laughter from the public gallery. Meade was on his feet, red-faced and screaming. Fool tottered up from his bench, then fell back coughing. Angry bellows were joined by hoots of derision. The king was staring about him with all the dignity of a startled rabbit. Jezal's eyes were fixed on the hooded man. He saw a great hand slip out from his sleeve and reach for the clasp on his cloak. He blinked in surprise. Was the hand blue, or was it just a trick of the light through the stained glass? The cloak dropped to the floor. Jezal swallowed, his heart thumping loud in his ears. It was like staring at a terrible wound. The more he was revolted, the less he could look away. The laughter died. The shouting died. The great space became terribly still once more. Fenris the Feared seemed larger yet without his cloak, towering over his cringing translator. Without any doubt he was the biggest man that Jezal had ever seen, if man he was. His face was in constant, twisted, sneering motion. His bulging eyes twitched and blinked as they stared crazily round at the assembly. His thin lips smiled and grimaced and frowned by turns, never still. But all this seemed ordinary, by comparison with his strangest feature. His whole left side, from head to toe, was covered in writing. Crabby runes were scrawled across the left half of his shaven head, across his eyelid, his lips, his scalp, his ear. His huge left arm was tattooed blue with tiny writing, from bulging shoulder to the tips of his long fingers. Even his bare left foot was covered in strange letters. An enormous, inhuman, painted monster stood at the very heart of the Union's government. Jezal's jaw hung open. Around the high table there were 14 knights of the body, each man a hard-trained fighter of good blood. There were perhaps 40 guardsmen of Jezal's own company around the walls, each one a seasoned veteran. They outnumbered these two Northmen more than 20 to 1, and were well armed with the best steel the king's armories could provide. Fenris the Feared carried no weapon. For all his size and strangeness, he should have been no threat to them. But Jezal did not feel safe. He felt alone, weak, helpless, and terribly afraid. His skin was tingling. His mouth was dry. He felt a sudden urge to run and hide and never come out again. And this strange effect was not limited to him, or even to those around the high table. Angry laughs turned to shocked gurgles as the painted monster turned slowly around in the center of the circular floor, flickering eyes running over the crowd. Meade shrank back onto his bench, anger all leached out of him. A couple of worthies on the front row actually scrambled over the backs of their benches and into the row behind. Others looked away, or covered their faces with their hands. One of the soldiers dropped his spear, and it clattered loudly to the floor. Fenris the Feared turned slowly to the high table, raising his great tattooed fist, opening his chasm of a mouth, a hideous spasm running over his face. "Angland!" he screamed, louder and more terrible by far than the Lord Chamberlain had ever been. The echoes of his voice bounced off the domed ceiling high above, resounded from the curved walls, filling the great space with piercing sound. One of the knights of the body stumbled back and slipped, his armored leg clanking against the edge of the high table. The king shrank back and covered his face with his hand, one terrified eye staring out from between his fingers, crown teetering on his head. The quill of one of the clerks dropped from his nerveless fingers. The hand of the other moved across the paper by habit while his mouth fell open, scrawling a messy word diagonally through the neat lines of script above. Angland. The Lord Chamberlain's face had turned waxy pale. He reached slowly for his goblet, raised it to his lips. It was empty. He placed it carefully back down on the table, but his hand was trembling, and the base rattled on the wood. He paused for a moment, breathing heavily through his nose. "Plainly, this offer is not acceptable." "That is unfortunate," said White-Eye Hansel. "But there is still the gift." Every eye turned towards him. In the north we have a tradition. On occasion when there is bad blood between two clans, when there is the threat of war, champions come forward from each side to fight for all their people so that the issue might be decided. with only one death. He slowly opened the lid of the wooden box. There was a long knife inside, blade polished mirror bright. His greatness, Bethod, sends the feared not only as his envoy, but as his champion. He will fight for England. If any here will face him, and spare you a war you will not win. He held the box up to the painted monster. This is my master's gift to you, and there could be none richer. Your lives. Fenris' right hand darted out and snatched the knife from the box. He raised it high, blade flashing in the colored light from the great windows. The knights should have jumped forward. Jezal should have drawn his sword. All should have rushed to the defense of the king, but nobody moved. Every mouth was agape, every eye fastened on that glinting tooth of steel. The blade flashed down. Its point drove easily through skin and flesh until it was buried right to the hilt. The point emerged, dripping blood, from the underside of Fenris' own tattooed left arm. His face twitched, but no more than usual. The blade moved grotesquely as he stretched out his fingers, raised his left arm high for all to see. The drops of blood made a steady patter on the floor of the Lord's round. "Who, fight me?" he screamed, great cords of sinew bulging from his neck. His voice was almost painful to the ear. Utter silence. The announcer, who was closest to the feared and already on his knees, swooned and collapsed on his face. Fenris turned his goggling eyes on the biggest knight before the table, a full head shorter than he was. "You?" he hissed. The unfortunate man's foot scraped on the floor as he backed away, no doubt wishing he had been born a dwarf. A puddle of dark blood had spread across the floor beneath Fenris' elbow. "You," he snarled at Fedordan me. The young man turned slightly gray, teeth rattling together, no doubt wishing he was someone else's son. Those blinking eyes swept across the ashen faces on the high table. Jezal's throat constricted as Fenris' eyes met his. You. Well, I would, but I'm terribly busy this afternoon. Perhaps tomorrow." The voice hardly sounded like his own. He certainly hadn't meant to say any such thing, but who else could it be? The words floated confidently, breezily up towards the gilded dome above. There was scattered laughter, a shout of "Bravo!" from somewhere at the back, but the eyes of the fear did not leave Jezal's for an instant. He waited for the sounds to die, then his mouth twisted into a hideous leer. "Tomorrow, then," he whispered. Jezal's guts gave a sudden painful shift. The seriousness of the situation pressed itself upon him like a ton of rocks. Him? Fight that? No, it was the Lord Chamberlain. He was still pale, but his voice had regained much of its vigor. Jezal took heart and fought manfully for control of his bowels. "No," barked Hoff again. "There will be no duel here. There is no issue to decide. England is a part of the Union by ancient law." White-Eye Hansel chuckled softly. "Ancient law. England is part of the North. 200 years ago there were Northmen there living free. You wanted iron, so you crossed the sea, and slaughtered them and stole their land. It must be, then, that most ancient of laws, that the strong take what they wish from the weak." His eyes narrowed. "We have that law also." Fenris the feared ripped the knife from his arm. A few last drops of blood spattered onto the tiles, but that was all. There was no wound on the tattooed flesh. No mark at all. The knife clattered onto the tiles, and lay there in the pool of blood at his feet. Fenris swept the assembly with his bulging, blinking, crazy eyes one last time. Then he turned and strode across the floor and up the aisle, lords and proxies scrambling away down their benches as he approached. White-Eye Hansel bowed low. "Perhaps the time will come when you wish that you had accepted our offer or our gift. You will hear from us," he said quietly. Then he held up 3 fingers to the Lord Chamberlain. "When it is time, we will send 3 signs. Send 300 if you wish," barked Hoff. "But this pantomime is over." White-Eye Hansel nodded pleasantly. "You will hear from us," and he turned and followed Fenris the feared out of the Lord's round. The great doors clapped shut. The quill of the nearest clerk scratched weakly against the paper. "You will hear from us!" Fedordan Mead turned towards the Lord Chamberlain, jaw locked tight, handsome features contorted with fury. "And this is the good news you would have me convey to my father?" he screamed. The open council erupted, bellowing, shouting, abuse directed toward anyone and everyone, chaos of the worst kind. Hoff jumped up, chair toppling over behind him, mouthing angry words. but even he was drowned out by the uproar. Meade turned his back on him and stormed out. Other delegates from the Anglian side of the room rose grimly and followed the son of their Lord Governor. Hoff stared after them, livid with anger, mouth working silently. Jezal watched the king slowly take his hand from his face and lean down toward his Lord Chamberlain. "When are the Northmen getting here?" he whispered. Chapter 2. The King of the Northmen. Logen breathed in deep, enjoying the unfamiliar feel of the cool breeze on his fresh-shaved jaw, and took in the view. The dawn mist was almost gone, and from the balcony outside Logen's room, high up on the side of one of the towers of the library, you could see for miles. The great valley was spread out before him, split into stark layers. On top was the gray and puffy white of the cloudy sky. Then there was the ragged line of black crags that ringed the lake, and the dim brown suggestion of others beyond. Next came the dark green of the wooded slopes, then the thin curving line of gray shingle on the beach. All was repeated in the still mirror of the lake below, another shadowy world, upside down beneath his own. Logen looked down at his hands, fingers spread out on the weathered stone of the parapet. There was no dirt, no dried blood under his cracked fingernails. They looked pale, soft, pinkish, strange. Even the scabs and scrapes on his knuckles were mostly healed. It was so long since Logen had been clean that he'd forgotten what it felt like. His new clothes were coarse against his skin, robbed of its usual covering of dirt and grease and dry sweat. Looking out at the still lake, clean and well-fed, he felt a different man. For a moment he wondered how this new Logen might turn out, but the bare stone of the parapet stared back at him where his missing finger used to be. That could never heal. He was Ninefingers still, the bloody nine, and always would be. Unless he lost any more fingers. He did smell better, though, that had to be admitted. "Did you sleep well, Master Ninefingers?" Wells was in the doorway, peering out onto the balcony. Like a baby. Logen didn't have the heart to tell the old servant that he'd slept outside. The first night he'd tried the bed, rolling and wriggling, unable to come to terms with the strange comfort of a mattress and the unfamiliar warmth of blankets. Next he'd tried the floor. That had been an improvement, but the air had still seemed close, flat, stale. The ceiling had hung over him, seeming to creep ever lower, threatening to crush him with the weight of stone above. It was only when he'd lain down on the hard flags of the balcony, with his old coat spread over him, and just the clouds and the stars above, that sleep had come. "Some habits are hard to break. You have a visitor," said Wells. "Me?" Malachus Quai's head appeared around the doorframe. His eyes were a little less sunken, the bags underneath them a little less dark. There was some color to his skin, and some flesh on his bones. He no longer looked like a corpse, just gaunt and sick, as he had done when Logen first met him. He guessed that was about as healthy as Kay ever looked. "Ha!" laughed Logen. "You survived." The apprentice gave a series of tired nods as he shambled across the room. He was swathed in a thick blanket which trailed on the floor and made it difficult for him to walk properly. He shuffled out of the door to the balcony and stood there, sniffing and blinking in the chill morning air. Logen was more pleased to see him than he'd expected. He clapped him on the back like an old friend, perhaps a little too warmly. The apprentice stumbled, blanket tangled round his feet, and would have fallen if Logen hadn't put out an arm to steady him. "Still not quite in fighting shape," muttered Quay, with a weak grin. Logen held his hands up. "Anything but that." Wells ducked through the doorway into the bright morning light. He had a roll of cloth and a knife in his hand. "Could I see your arm, Master Ninefingers?" Logen had almost forgotten about the cut. There was no new blood on the bandage, and when he unwound it, there was a long red-brown scab underneath, running almost all the way from wrist to elbow, surrounded by fresh pink skin. It hardly hurt anymore, just itched. It crossed two other, older scars. One, a jagged gray effort near his wrist. He thought he might have got in the duel with Three Trees all those years ago. Logen grimaced as he remembered the battering they'd given each other. The second scar, fainter, higher up, he wasn't sure about. Could have come from anywhere. Wells bent down and tested the flesh round the wound while Quay peered cautiously over his shoulder. "It's mending well. You're a fast healer. Lots of practice." Wells looked up at Logen's face, where the cut on his forehead had already faded to one more pink line. "I can see." Would it be foolish to advise you to avoid sharp objects in the future? Logen laughed. Believe it or not, I always did my best to avoid them in the past. But they seemed to seek me out, despite my efforts. Well, said the old servant, cutting off a fresh length of cloth and winding it carefully round Logen's forearm. I hope this is the last bandage you ever need. So do I, said Logen, flexing his fingers. So do I, but he didn't think it would be. Breakfast will be ready soon. And Wells left the two of them alone on the balcony. They stood there in silence for a moment, then the wind blew up cold from the valley. Quay shivered and pulled his blanket tight around him. Out there, by the lake, you could have left me. I would have left me. Logen frowned. Time was he'd have done it and never given it a second thought. But things change. I've left a lot of people in my time. Reckon I'm sick of that feeling. The apprentice pursed his lips and looked out at the valley, the woods, the distant mountains. I never saw a man killed before. You're lucky. You've seen a lot of death then, Logen winced. In his youth, he would have loved to answer that very question. He could have bragged and boasted and listed the actions he'd been in, the named men he'd killed. He couldn't say now when the pride had dried up. It had happened slowly, as the wars became bloodier, as the causes became excuses, as the friends went back to the mud one by one. Logen rubbed at his ear, felt the big notch that Toldura's sword had made long ago. He could have stayed silent, but for some reason he felt the need to be honest. I fought in 3 campaigns, he began, in 7 pitched battles, in countless raids and skirmishes and desperate defenses and bloody actions of every kind. I fought in the driving snow, the blasting wind, the middle of the night. I've been fighting all my life, one enemy or another, one friend or another. I've known little else. I've seen men killed for a word, for a look, for nothing at all. A woman tried to stab me once for killing her husband, and I threw her down a well. And that's far from the worst of it. Life used to be cheap as dirt to me. Cheaper. I fought 10 single combats and I won them all. But I fought on the wrong side and for all the wrong reasons. I've been ruthless and brutal and a coward. I've stabbed men in the back, burned them, drowned them, crushed them with rocks, killed them asleep, unarmed, or running away. I've run away myself more than once. I've pissed myself with fear. I've begged for my life. I've been wounded, often, and badly, and screamed and cried like a baby whose mother took her tit away. I've no doubt the world would be a better place if I'd been killed years ago, but I haven't been, and I don't know why. He looked down at his hands, pink and clean on the stone. There are few men with more blood on their hands than me. None, that I know of. The Bloody Nine they call me, my enemies, and there's a lot of 'em. Always more enemies and fewer friends. Blood gets you nothing but more blood. It follows me now, always, like my shadow, and like my shadow, I can never be free of it. I should never be free of it. I've earned it. I've deserved it. I've sought it out. Such is my punishment, and that was all. Logen breathed a deep, ragged sigh and stared out at the lake. He couldn't bring himself to look at the man beside him, didn't want to see the expression on his face. Who wants to learn his keeping company with the Bloody Nine, a man who's wrought more death than the plague, and with less regret? They could never be friends now, not with all those corpses between them. Then he felt Quay's hand clap him on the shoulder. "Well, there it is," he said, grinning from ear to ear. "But you saved me, and I'm right grateful for it. I've saved a man this year and only killed 4. I'm born again." And they both laughed for a while, and it felt good. "So, Malachus, I see you are back with us." They turned, Quay stumbling on his blanket and looking a touch sick. The first of the Magi was standing in the doorway, dressed in a long white shirt with sleeves rolled up to the elbow. He still looked more like a butcher than a wizard to Logen. "Master Bayaz, I was just coming to see you," stuttered Quay. "Indeed. How fortunate for us both, then, that I have come to you." The Magus stepped out onto the balcony. "It occurs to me that a man who is well enough to talk, and laugh, and venture out of doors is doubtless well enough to read, and study, and expand his tiny mind. What would you say to that?" Doubtless, yes. Tell me, how are your studies progressing? The wretched apprentice looked utterly confused. They'd been somewhat interrupted. You made no progress with Juven's principles of art while you were lost in the hills in bad weather? No progress, no. And your knowledge of the histories, did that develop far, while Master Ninefingers was carrying you back to the library? Must confess, it didn't. Your exercises and meditations, though, surely you have been practicing those, while unconscious this past week. Well, no, the unconsciousness was. So, tell me, would you say that you are ahead of the game, so to speak? Or have your studies fallen behind? Quai stared down at the floor. They were behind when I left. Perhaps then you could tell me where you plan to spend the day. The apprentice looked up hopefully. At my desk. Excellent. Baez smiled wide. I was about to suggest it, but you have anticipated me. Your keenness to learn does you much credit. Quai nodded furiously and hurried towards the door, the hem of his blanket trailing on the flags. Baythought is coming, murmured Baez. He will be here today. Logen's smile vanished. His throat felt suddenly tight. He remembered their last meeting well enough, stretched out on his face on the floor of Bethod's Hall at Carlion, beaten and broken, and well chained up, dribbling blood into the straw, and hoping the end wouldn't be too long coming. Then, no reason given, they'd let him go, flung him out the gates with the Dogman, Three Trees, the weakest and the rest, and told him never to come back. Never. The first time Bethod ever showed a grain of mercy, and the last, Logen didn't doubt. Today? He asked, trying to keep his voice even. Yes, and soon. The king of the Northmen. Ha! The arrogance of him. Baez glanced sidelong at Logen. He is coming to ask me for a favor, and I would like you to be there. He won't like that. Exactly. The wind felt colder than before. If Logen never saw Bethod again, it would be far too soon. But some things have to be done. It's better to do them than to live with the fear of them. That's what Logen's father would have said. So he took a deep breath and squared his shoulders. I'll be there. Excellent. Then there is but one thing missing. What? Baez smirked. You need a weapon. It was dry in the cellars beneath the library, dry and dark and very, very confusing. They'd gone up and down steps, around corners, past doors, taking here or there a turning to the left or right. The place was a warren. Logen hoped he didn't lose sight of the wizard's flickering torch, or he could easily be stuck beneath the library forever. Dry down here. Nice and dry, Baez was saying to himself, voice echoing down the passageway and merging with their flapping footfalls. There's nothing worse than damp for books. He pulled up suddenly, next to a heavy door. Or for weapons. He gave the door a gentle shove and it swung silently open. Look at that! Hasn't been open for years, but the hinges still move smooth as butter. That's craftsmanship for you. Why does no one care about craftsmanship anymore? Baez stepped over the threshold without waiting for an answer, and Logen followed close behind. The wizard's torch lit up a long, low hall with walls of rough stone blocks, the far end lost in shadows. The room was lined with racks and shelves, the floor littered with boxes and stands, everything heaped and bursting with a mad array of arms and armor. Blades and spikes and polished surfaces of wood and metal caught the flickering torchlight as Baez paced slowly across the stone floor, weaving between the weapons and casting around. Quite a collection, muttered Logen, as he followed the magus through the clutter. A load of old junk mostly, but there should be a few things worth the finding. Baez took a helmet from a suit of ancient gilded plate armor and looked it over with a frown. What do you make of that? I've never been much for armor. No, you don't strike me as the type. All very well on horseback, I dare say, but it's a pain in the arse when you've a journey to make on foot. He tossed the helmet back onto its stand, then stood there staring at the armor, lost in thought. Once you've got it on, how do you piss? Logen frowned. He said. But Baez was already moving off down the room, and taking the light with him. You must have used a few weapons in your time, Master Ninefingers. What's your preference for? I've never really had one, said Logen, ducking under a rusty halberd leaning out from a rack. A champion never knows what he might be called on to fight with. Of course. Baez took up a long spear with a vicious barbed head, and wafted it around a bit. Logen stepped back cautiously. Deadly enough. You could keep a man at bay with one of these, but a man with a spear needs a lot of friends, and they all need spears as well. Bayaz shoved it back on the rack and moved on. This looks fearsome. The magus took hold of the gnarled shaft of a huge double-bladed axe. Shit, he said as he lifted it up, veins bulging out of his neck. It's heavy enough. He set it down with a thump, making the rack wobble. You could kill a man with that. You could cut him clean in half if he was standing still. This is better, said Logen. It was a simple, solid-looking sword and a scabbard of weathered brown leather. Oh, yes, indeed. Much, much better. That blade is the work of Canidius, the master maker himself. Bayaz handed his torch to Logen and took the long sword from the rack. Has it ever occurred to you, Master Ninefingers, that a sword is different from other weapons? Axes and maces and so forth are lethal enough, but they hang on the belt like dumb brutes. He ran an eye over the hilt, plain cold metal scored with faint grooves for a good grip, glinting in the torchlight. But a sword has a voice, eh? Sheathed it has little to say, to be sure, but you need only put your hand on the hilt, and it begins to whisper in your enemy's ear. He wrapped his fingers tightly round the grip, a gentle warning, a word of caution. Do you hear it? Logen nodded slowly. Now, murmured Bayaz, compare it to the sword half drawn. A foot length of metal hissed out of the sheath, a single silver letter shining near the hilt. The blade itself was dull, but its edge had a cold and frosty glint. It speaks louder, does it not? It hisses a dire threat. It makes a deadly promise. Do you hear it? Logen nodded again, his eye fastened on that glittering edge. Now compare it to the sword full drawn. Bayaz whipped the long blade from its sheath with a faint ringing sound, brought it up so that the point hovered inches from Logen's face. It shouts now, does it not? It screams defiance. It bellows a challenge. Do you hear it? Said Logen, leaning back and staring slightly cross-eyed at the shining point of the sword. Bayaz let it drop and slid it gently back into its scabbard. Something to Logen's relief. Yes, a sword has a voice. Axes and maces and so forth are lethal enough, but a sword is a subtle weapon, and suited to a subtle man. You, I think, Master Ninefingers, are subtler than you appear. Logen frowned as Bayaz held the sword out to him. He had been accused of many things in his life, but never subtlety. Consider it a gift. My thanks for your good manners. Logen thought about it a moment. He hadn't owned a proper weapon since before he crossed the mountains, and he wasn't keen to take one up again. But Bethard was coming, and soon. Better to have it, and not want it, than to want it, and not have it. Far, far better. You have to be realistic about these things. Thank you, said Logen, taking the sword from Bayaz and handing him back the torch. I think. A small fire crackled in the grate, and the room was warm and homely and comfortable. But Logen didn't feel comfortable. He stood by the window, staring down into the courtyard below, nervous and twitchy and scared, like he used to be before a fight. Bethod was coming. He was somewhere out there, on the road through the woods, or passing between the stones, or across the bridge, or through the gate. The first of the Magi didn't seem tense. He sat comfortably in his chair, his feet up on the table next to a long wooden pipe, leafing through a small, white-bound book with a faint smile on his face. No one had ever looked calmer, and that only made Logen feel worse. Is it good? Only made Logen feel worse. Is it good? Asked Logen. Is what good? The book. Oh yes, it is the best of books. It is Juven's Principles of Art, the very cornerstone of my order. Bayaz waved his free hand at the shelves which covered 2 walls, and the hundreds of other identical books lined neatly upon them. It's all the same. One book, one? Logen's eyes scanned across the thick white spines. That's a pretty damn long book. Have you read it all? Bayaz chuckled. Oh yes, many times. Every one of my order must read it and eventually make their own copy. He turned the book around so that Logen could see. The pages were thickly covered with lines of neat but unintelligible symbols. I wrote these long ago. You should read it too. I'm really not much of a reader. No? Asked Bayaz. Shame. He flicked over the page and carried on. What about that one? What about that one? There was another book, sat alone on its side, on the very top of one of the shelves. A large, black book, scarred and battered-looking. That written by this Juvens as well. Bayaz frowned up at it. No, his brother wrote that. He got up from his chair, stretched up, and pulled it down. This is a different kind of knowledge. He dragged open his desk drawer, slid the black book inside, and slammed it shut. Oh, best left alone, he muttered, sitting back down and opening up the Principles of Art again. Logen took a deep breath, put his left hand on the hilt of the sword, felt the cold metal pressing into his palm. The feel of it was anything but reassuring. He let go and turned back to the window, frowning down into the courtyard. He felt his breath catch in his throat. Bethod, he's here. Good, muttered Bayaz absently. Who does he have with him? Logen peered at the three figures in the courtyard. Scale, he said with a scowl. And a woman. I don't recognize her. They're dismounting. Logen licked his dry lips. They're coming in. Yes, murmured Bayaz. That is how one gets to a meeting. Try to calm yourself, my friend. Breathe. Logen leaned back against the whitewashed plaster, arms folded, and took a deep breath. It didn't help. The hard knot of worry in his chest only pressed harder. He could hear heavy footsteps in the corridor outside. The doorknob turned. Scale was the first into the room. Bethod's eldest son had always been burly, even as a boy. But since Logen last saw him, he'd grown monstrous. His rock of a head seemed almost an afterthought on top of all that brawn, his skull a good deal narrower than his neck. He had a great block of jaw, a flat stub of a nose, and furious, bulging, arrogant little eyes. His thin mouth was twisted in a constant sneer, much like his younger brother Calder's, but there was less guile here, and a lot more violence. He had a heavy broadsword on his hip, and his meaty hand was never far from it as he glowered at Logen, oozing malice from every pore. The woman came next. She was very tall, slender and pale, almost ill-looking. Her slanting eyes were as narrow and cold as Scales were bulging and wrathful, and were surrounded with a quantity of dark paint, which made them look narrower and colder still. There were golden rings on her long fingers, golden bracelets on her thin arms, golden chains around her white neck. She swept the room with her frosty blue eyes, each thing she noticed seeming to lift her to new heights of disgust and contempt. First the furniture, then the books, particularly Logen, and Bayaz most of all. The self-styled king of the Northmen came last, and more magnificent than ever, robed in rich colored cloth and rare white furs. He wore a heavy golden chain across his shoulders, a golden circlet round his head, set with a single diamond, big as a bird's egg. His smiling face was more deeply lined than Logen remembered, his hair and beard touched with grey, but he was no less tall, no less vigorous, no less handsome, and he gained much of authority and wisdom of majesty. He looked every inch a great man, a wise man, a just man. He looked every inch a king, but Logen knew better. Bethod, said Bayaz warmly, snapping his book shut. My old friend, you can hardly imagine what a joy it is to see you again. He swung his feet off the table and gestured at the golden chain, the flashing diamond. And to see you so hugely advanced in the world. I remember the time was you were happy to visit me alone. But I suppose great men must be attended on, and I see you have brought some other people. Your charming son I know, of course. I see that you've been eating well at least, eh? Scale? Prince Scale, rumbled Bethod's monstrous son, his eyes popping out even more. Said Bayaz with an eyebrow raised. I have not had the pleasure of meeting your other companion before. I am Korib, Logen blinked. The woman's voice was the most beautiful thing he'd ever heard. Calming, soothing, intoxicating. I am a sorceress, she sang, tossing her head with a scornful smile. A sorceress from the utmost north. Logen stood frozen, his mouth half open. His hatred seeped away. They were all friends here, more than friends. He couldn't take his eyes from her, didn't want to. The others in the room had faded. It was as if she was speaking only to him, and the fondest wish of his heart was that she should never stop. But Bayaz only laughed. A real sorceress, and you have the golden voice. How wonderful. It's a long time since I heard that one, but it will not serve you here. Logen shook his head clear, and his hatred rushed back in, hot and reassuring. Tell me, does one have to study to become a sorceress, or is it simply a question of jewelry and a deal of paint about the face? Korib's eyes narrowed to deadly blue slits. But the first of the Magi didn't give her time to speak, and from the utmost north. Imagine that! He shivered slightly. It must be cold up there this time of year. Rough on the nipples, eh? Have you come to us for the warm weather, or is there something else? I go where my king commands, she hissed, pointed chin lifting a little higher. Your king? Asked Bayaz, staring about the room as though there must be someone else there, hiding in the corner. My father's king of the Northmen now, snarled Scale. He sneered at Logen. You should kneel to him, bloody nine. He sneered at Bayaz. And so should you, old man. The first of the Magi spread his hands in apology. Oh, I'm afraid I don't kneel to anyone. Too old for it. Stiffness in the joints, you see. Scale's boot thumped heavy on the floor as he began to move forward, a curse half out of his mouth, but his father placed a gentle hand on his arm. Come now, my son. There is no need for kneeling here. His voice was cold and even as freshly fallen snow. It is not fitting that we bicker. Are our interests not the same? Peace in the north? I have come only to ask for your wisdom, Bayaz, as I did in days past. Is it so wrong to seek the help of an old friend? No one had ever sounded more genuine, more reasonable, more trustworthy. But Logen knew better. But do we not have peace in the north already? Bayaz leaned back in his chair, hands clasped before him. Are the feuds not all ended? Were you not the victor? Do you not have everything you wanted, and more? King of the Northmen, eh? What help could I possibly offer you? I only share my counsel with friends, Bayaz, and you have been no friend to me of late. You turn away my messengers, my son, even. You play host to my sworn enemies. He frowned towards Logen, and his lip curled. Do you know what manner of thing this is? The bloody nine? An animal, a coward, an oath-breaker. Is that the kind of company that you prefer? Bethard smiled a friendly smile as he turned back to Bayaz, but there was no missing the threat in his words. I fear the time has come for you to decide whether you are with me or against me. There can be no middle ground in this. Either you are a part of my future or a relic of the past. Yours is the choice, my friend. Logen had seen Bethard give such choices before. Some men had yielded. The rest had gone back to the mud. But Bayaz, it seemed, was not to be rushed. Which shall it be? He reached forward slowly and took his pipe from the table. The future or the past? He strolled over to the fire and squatted down, back turned to his three guests, took a stick from the grate, set it to the bowl, and puffed slowly away. It seemed to take an age for him to get the damn thing lit. With or against? He mused as he returned to his chair. Well? Demanded Bethod. Bayaz stared up at the ceiling and blew out a thin stream of yellow smoke. Korib looked the old magus up and down with icy contempt. Scale twitched with impatience. Bethod waited, eyes a little narrowed. Finally, Bayaz gave a heavy sigh. Very well. I am with you. Bethard smiled wide, and Logen felt a lurch of terrible disappointment. He had hoped for better from the first of the Magi. Damn foolish. How he never learned to stop hoping. Good, murmured the king of the Northmen. I knew you would see my way of thinking in the end. He slowly licked his lips like a hungry man watching good food brought in. I mean to invade England. Bayaz raised an eyebrow. Then he started to chuckle. Then he thumped the table with his fist. Oh, that's good. That's very good. You find peace does not suit your kingdom, eh, Bethod? The clans are not used to being friends, are they? They hate each other and they hate you, am I right? Well, smiled Bethod, they are somewhat restive, I bet they are. But send them to war with the Union, then they will be a nation, eh? United against the common enemy, to be sure. And if you win, you'll be the man who did the impossible, the man who drove the damn Southerners out of the North. You'll be loved, or at any rate, more feared than ever. If you lose, well, at least you keep the clans busy a while, and sap their strength in the process. I remember now why I used to like you. An excellent plan. Bethard looked smug. Of course, and we will not lose. The Union is soft, arrogant, unprepared. With your help. My help? interrupted Bayaz. You presume too much, but you owe that. The magus shrugged. I am a liar. Bayaz lifted his pipe to his mouth. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then Bethod's eyes narrowed. Korob's widened, Scale's heavy brow crinkled with confusion. Logen's smile slowly returned. A liar, hissed the sorceress. And more besides, say I. Her voice still had the singing note about it, but it was a different song now, hard, shrill, murderous sharp. You old worm, hiding here behind your walls and your servants and your books, your time is long past, fool. You are nothing but words and dust. The first of the Magi calmly pursed his lips and blew out smoke. Words and dust, old worm. Well, we shall see. We will come to your library. The wizard set his pipe carefully down on the table, a little smoke still curling up out of the bowl. We will come back to your library, and put your walls to the hammer, your servants to the sword, and your books to the fire, to the silence. Bayaz was frowning now, deeper even than he had at Calder, days before in the yard outside. Again Logen felt the desire to step away, but stronger by far. He found himself glancing around the room for a place to hide. Korob's lips still moved, but only a meaningless croak came out. Break my walls, would you? Murmured Bayaz. His gray brows drew inwards, deep, hard grooves cutting into the bridge of his nose. Kill my servants, will you? Asked Bayaz. The room had turned very chill, despite the logs on the fire. Burn my books, say you? Thundered Bayaz. You say too much, witch. Korob's knees buckled. Her white hand clawed at the doorframe, chains and bangles jingling together as she slumped against the wall. Words and dust, am I? Bayaz thrust up 4 fingers. 4 gifts you had of me, Bethod the sun in winter, a storm in summer, and 2 things you could never have known but for my art. What have you given me in return, eh? This lake and this valley, which were mine already, and but one other thing. Bethod's eyes flicked across to Logen, then back. That is not my idea of manners. Scale had caught up now, and his eyes were near popping out of his head. Manners? What does a king need with manners? A king takes what he wants. And he took a heavy step towards the table. Now Scale was big enough and cruel enough to be sure. Most likely you could never find a better man for kicking someone once he was down. But Logen wasn't down. Not yet, and he was good and sick of listening to this bloated fool. He stepped forward to block Scale's path, resting his hand on the hilt of his sword. Far enough. The prince looked Logen over with his bulging eyes, held up his meaty fist, squeezing his great fingers so the knuckles turned white. Don't tempt me, Ninefingers, you broken cur. Your day's long past. I could crush you like an egg. You can try it, but I've no mind to let you. You know my work. 1 step more, and I'll set to work on you. You fucking swollen pig. Scale, snapped Bethod. There is nothing for us here, that much is plain. We are leaving. The hulking prince locked his great lump of a jaw, his huge hands clenching and unclenching by his sides, glowering at Logen with the most bestial hatred imaginable. Then he sneered, and slowly backed away. Bayaz leaned forward. You said you would bring peace to the north, Bethod. And what have you done? You have piled war on war. The land is bled white with your pride and your brutality. King of the Northmen? Ha! You're not worth the helping. And to think I had such high hopes for you. Bethod only frowned, his eyes as cold as the diamond on his forehead. You have made an enemy of me, Bayaz, and I am a bad enemy to have. The very worst. You will yet regret this day's work. He turned his scorn on Logen. As for you, Ninefingers, you will have no more mercy from me. Every man in the north will be your enemy now. You will be hated and hunted and cursed wherever you go. I will see to it. Logen shrugged. There was nothing new there. Bayaz stood up from his chair. You've said your piece. Now take your witch and get you gone. Korob stumbled from the room first, still gasping for air. Scale gave Logen one last scowl, then he turned and lumbered away. The so-called king of the Northmen was the last to leave, nodding slowly and sweeping the room with a deadly glare. As their footsteps faded down the corridor, Logen took a deep breath, steadied himself, and let his hand drop from the hilt of the sword. So, said Bayaz brightly, that went well. Chapter 3. A road between 2 dentists, past midnight, and it was dark in the middle way. dark, and it smelled bad. It always smelled bad down by the docks. Old salt water, rotten fish, tar and sweat and horse shit. In a few hours' time, this street would be thronging with noise and activity. Tradesmen shouting, laborers cursing under their loads, merchants hurrying to and fro, 100 carts and wagons rumbling over the dirty cobbles. There would be an endless tide of people, thronging off the ships and thronging on. People from every part of the world, words shouted in every language under the sun. But at night it was still and silent. Silent as the grave, and even worse smelling. "It's down here," said Severard, strolling towards the shadowy mouth of a narrow alley, wedged in between two looming warehouses. "Did he give you much trouble?" asked Glokta as he shuffled painfully after. "Not too much." The practical adjusted his mask, letting some air in behind. "Must get very clammy under there, all that breath and sweat. No wonder practicals tend to have bad tempers. He gave Rue's mattress some trouble, stabbed it all to bits. Then Frost knocked him on the head. Funny thing, when that boy knocks a man on the head, the trouble all goes out of him. What about Rue's? Still alive." The light from Severad's lamp passed over a pile of putrid rubbish. Glokta heard rats squeaking in the darkness as they scurried away. "You know all the best neighborhoods, don't you, Severard? That's what you pay me for, Inquisitor." His dirty black boot squelched, heedless, into the stinking mush. Glokta limped gingerly around it, holding the hem of his coat up in his free hand. "I grew up round here," continued the practical. "Folk don't ask questions, except for us. We always have questions, course." Severard gave a muffled giggle. "We're the Inquisition." His lamp picked out a dented iron gate, the high wall above topped with rusty spikes. "This is it." "Indeed. And what an auspicious-looking address it is." The gate evidently didn't see much use. Its brown hinges squealed in protest as the practical unlocked it and heaved it open. Glokta stepped awkwardly over a puddle that had built up in a rut in the ground, cursing as his coat trailed in the foul water. The hinges screamed again as Severard wrestled the heavy gate shut, forehead creasing with the effort. Then he lifted the hood on his lantern, lighting up a wide ornamental courtyard, choked with rubble and weeds and broken wood. "And here we are," said Severard. "It must once have been a magnificent building, in its way. How much would all those windows have cost? How much all that decorative stonework? Visitors must have been awed by its owner's wealth, if not his good taste, but no more. The windows were blinded with rotting boards, the swirls of masonry were choked with moss and caked with bird droppings. The thin layer of green marble on the pillars was cracked and flaking, exposing the rotten plaster underneath. All was crumbled, broken and decayed. Fallen lumps of the facade were strewn everywhere, casting long shadows on the high walls of the yard. Half the head of a broken cherub stared mournfully up at Glokta as he limped past. He had been expecting some dingy warehouse and dank cellar near the water. "What is this place?" he asked, staring up at the rotting palace. "Some merchant built it years ago." Severard kicked a lump of broken sculpture out of his way and it clattered off into the darkness. "A rich man, very rich, wanted to live near his warehouses and his wharves, keep one eye on business." He strolled up the cracked and mossy steps to the huge, flaking front door. He thought the idea might catch on, but how could it? Who'd want to live round here if they didn't have to? Then he lost all his money, as merchants do. His creditors have had trouble finding a buyer. Glokta stared at a broken fountain, leaning at an angle and half filled with stagnant water. Hardly surprising. Severad's lamp barely lit the cavernous space of the entrance hall. Two enormous, curved, slumping staircases loomed out of the gloom opposite them. A wide balcony ran around the walls at first-floor level, but a great section of it had collapsed and crashed through the damp floorboards below, so that one of the stairways ended, amputated, hanging in the empty air. The damp floor was strewn with lumps of broken plaster, fallen roofing slates, shattered timbers, and a spattering of gray bird droppings. The night sky peered in through several yawning holes in the roof. Glokta could hear the vague sound of pigeons cooing in amongst the shadowy rafters, and somewhere the slow dripping of water. What a place. Glokta stifled a smile. "It reminds me of myself, in a way. We both were magnificent once, and we both have our best days far behind us." "It's big enough, wouldn't you say?" asked Severard, picking his way in amongst the rubble towards a yawning doorway under the broken staircase, his lamp casting strange, slanting shadows as he moved. "Oh, I'd have thought so, unless we get more than 1,000 prisoners at once." Glokta shuffled after him, leaning heavily on his cane, worried about his footing on the slimy floor. "I'll slip and fall right on my arse, right here in all this bird shit." That would be perfect. The arch opened into a crumbling hall, rotten plaster falling away in sheets, showing the damp bricks beneath. Gloomy doorways passed by on either side, the sort of place that would make a man nervous if he was prone to nervousness. He might imagine unpleasant things in these chambers, just beyond the lamplight, and horrible acts taking place in the darkness. He looked up at Severad, ambling jauntily along in front, tuneless whistling vaguely audible from behind his mask, and frowned. But we are not prone to nervousness. Perhaps we are the unpleasant things. Perhaps the acts are ours. "How big is this place?" asked Glokta as he hobbled along. 35 rooms, not counting the servants' quarters. A palace. How the hell did you find it? I used to sleep here some nights, after my mother died. I found a way in. The roof was still mostly on back then, and it was a dry place to sleep. Dry and safe. More or less. What a hard life it's been. Thug and torturer is a real step up for you, isn't it? Every man has his excuses, and the more vile the man becomes, the more touching the story has to be. What is my story now, I wonder? Ever resourceful, eh, Severad? That's what you pay me for, Inquisitor. They passed into a wide space. A drawing room, a study, a ballroom even. It was big enough. Once beautiful panels were sagging from the walls, covered in mole and flaking gilt paint. Severad moved over to one still attached and pushed it firmly at one side. There was a soft click as it swung open, revealing a dark archway beyond. A hidden door. How delightful. How sinister. How very appropriate. "This place is as full of surprises as you are," said Glokta, limping painfully towards the opening. "And you wouldn't believe the price I got. I bought this? Oh no. I did, with Rue's money, and now I'm renting it to you." Severad's eyes sparkled in the lamplight. "It's a gold mine, ha!" laughed Glokta, as he shuffled carefully down the steps. "All this, and ahead for business, too. Perhaps I'll be working for Archlector Severard one of these days." Stranger things have happened. Glokta's shadow loomed out ahead of him into the darkness as he labored crab-like down the steps, his right hand feeling out the gaps between the rough stone blocks to lend him some support. "The cellars go on for miles," muttered Severad from behind. "We have our own private access to the canals, and to the sewers too, if you're interested in sewers." They passed a dark opening on their left, then another on their right, always going slowly downwards. "Frost tells me you can get all the way from here to the Agrient, without once coming up for air. That could be useful. I'd say so, if you can stand the smell." Severad's lamp found a heavy door with a small barred opening. "Home again," he said, and gave 4 quick knocks. A moment later, Practical Frost's masked face loomed abruptly out of the darkness at the little window. "Only us." The albino's eyes showed no sign of warmth or recognition, but then they never do. Heavy bolts slid back on the other side of the door, and it swung smoothly open. There was a table and chair and fresh torches on the walls, but they were unlit. It must have been pitch black in here until our little lamp arrived. Glokta looked over at the albino. "Have you just been sitting here in the dark?" The hulking Practical shrugged, and Glokta shook his head. "Sometimes I worry about you, Practical Frost. I really do." "Haze down here," said Severad, ambling off down the hall, heels making clicking echoes on the stone flags of the floor. This must once have been a wine cellar. There were several barrel-vaulted chambers leading off to either side, sealed with heavy gratings. "Glokta." Salem Rue's fingers were gripped tightly round the bars, his face pressed up between them. Glokta stopped in front of the cell and rested his throbbing leg. "Ruse, how are you? I hardly expected to see you again so soon." He had lost weight already. His skin was slack and pale, still marked with fading bruises. "He does not look well, not well at all." "What's happening, Glokta? Please, why am I here?" "Well, where's the harm? It seems the Archlector still has a use for you. He wants you to give evidence." Glokta leaned towards the bars. "Before the open council," he whispered. Ruse grew paler still. "Then what? We'll see. Angland, ruse, Angland, what if I refuse, the Archlector? Glokta chuckled. No, Ruse, you don't want to do a thing like that. He turned away and shuffled after Severard. For pity's sake, it's dark down here. You'll get used to it. Glokta called over his shoulder. Amazing, what one can get used to. The last of the chambers held their latest prisoner, chained up to a bracket in the wall, naked and bagged, of course. He was short and stocky, tending slightly to fat, with fresh grazes on his knees, no doubt from being flung into the rough stone cell. So this is our killer, eh? The man rolled himself up onto his knees when he heard Glokta's voice, straining forward against his chains. A little blood had soaked through the front of the bag and dried there, making a brown stain on the canvas. A very unsavory character indeed, said Severard. Doesn't look too fearsome now, though, does he? They never do once they're brought to this. Where do we work? Severard's eyes smiled even more. Oh, you're going to like this, Inquisitor. It's a touch theatrical, said Glokta, but none the worse for that. The room was large and circular with a domed ceiling, painted with a curious mural that ran all the way round the curved walls. The body of a man lay on the grass, bleeding from many wounds, with a forest behind him. 11 other figures walked away, 6 on one side, 5 on the other, painted in profile, awkwardly posed, dressed in white but their features indistinct. They faced another man, arms stretched out, all in black, and with a sea of colorfully daubed fire behind him. The harsh light from 6 bright lamps didn't make the work look any better. Hardly of the highest quality, more decoration than art, but the effect is quite striking nonetheless. No idea what it's supposed to be, said Severard. The Mother Mera, mumbled Practical Frost. Of course, said Glokta, staring up at the dark figure on the wall, and the flames behind. You should study your history, Practical Severard. This is the master-maker Canedius. He turned and pointed to the dying man on the opposite wall. And this is great Juvens, whom he has killed. He swept his hand over the figures in white. And these are Juven's apprentices, the Magi, marching to avenge him. Ghost stories fit to scare children with. What kind of man pays to have shit like this on the walls of his cellar? Asked Severard, shaking his head. Oh, this sort of thing was quite popular at one time. There's a room painted like this in the palace. This is a copy, and a cheap one. Glokta looked up at the shadowed face of Canedius, staring grimly down into the room, and the bleeding corpse on the opposite wall. Still, there's something quite unsettling about it, isn't there? Or there would be, if I gave a damn. Blood, fire, death, vengeance. No idea why you'd want it in the cellar. Perhaps there was something dark about our friend the merchant. There's always something dark about a man with money, said Severard. Who are these two? Glokta frowned, peering forward. 2 small, vague figures could be seen under the arms of the maker, one on each side. Who knows? Asked Glokta. Maybe they're his practicals. Severard laughed. A vague exhalation of air even came from behind Frost's mask, though his eyes showed no sign of amusement. My, he must be thoroughly tickled. Glokta shuffled toward the table in the center of the room. 2 chairs faced each other across the smooth, polished surface. One was a spare, hard affair of the sort you found in the cellars of the House of Questions, but the other was altogether more impressive, throne-like almost, with sweeping arms and a high back, upholstered in brown leather. Glokta placed his cane against the table and lowered himself carefully, back aching. Oh, this is an excellent chair, he breathed, sinking slowly back into the soft leather, stretching out his leg, throbbing from the long walk here. There was a slight resistance. He looked beneath the table. There was a matching footstool there. Glokta tipped his head back and laughed. Oh, this is fine. You shouldn't have. He settled his leg down on the stool with a comfortable sigh. It was the least we could do, said Severard, folding his arms and leaning against the wall next to the bleeding body of Juvens. We did well from your friend Ruse, very well. You've always seen us right, and we don't forget that. Said Frost, nodding his head. You spoil me. Glokta stroked the polished wood on the arm of the chair. My boys, where would I be without you? Back home in bed with mother fussing over me, I suppose. Wondering how she'll ever find a nice girl to marry me now. He glanced over the instruments on the table. His case was there, of course, and a few other things, well used, but still highly serviceable. A pair of long-handled tongs particularly caught his eye. He glanced up at Severard. Teeth? Seemed a good place to start. Fair enough. Glokta licked at his own empty gums, then cracked his knuckles, one by one. Teeth, it is. As soon as the gag was off, the assassin started screaming at them in Styrian, spitting and cursing, struggling pointlessly at his chains. Glokta didn't understand a word of it, but I think I catch the meaning more or less. Something very offensive indeed, I imagine. Something about our mothers and so on. But I am not easily offended. He was a rough-looking sort, face pockmarked with acne scars, nose broken more than once, and bent out of shape. How disappointing. I was hoping the Mercers might have gone up market on this occasion at least. But that's merchants for you. Always looking for the bargain. Practical Frost ended the torrent of unintelligible abuse by punching the man heavily in the stomach. That'll take his breath away for a moment. Long enough to get the first word in. Now then, said Glokta. We'll have none of that nonsense here. We know you're a professional, sent to blend in and do a job. You wouldn't blend in too well if you couldn't even speak the language now, would you? The prisoner had got his breath back. Pox on all of you, you bastards, he gasped. Excellent. The common tongue will do nicely for our little chats. I have a feeling we may end up having several. Is there anything you would like to know about us before we begin? Or shall we get straight to it? The prisoner stared up suspiciously at the painted figure of the master-maker, looming over Glokta's head. Where am I? We're just off the middle way, down near the water. Glokta winced as the muscles in his legs suddenly convulsed. He stretched it out cautiously, waiting until he heard the knee click before he carried on. You know, the middle way is one of the very arteries of the city. It runs straight through its heart, from the Agrient to the sea. It passes through many different districts, has all manner of notable buildings. Some of the most fashionable addresses in the whole city are just up the lane. To me, though, it's nothing but a road between two dentists. The prisoner's eyes narrowed, then darted over the instruments on the table, but no more cursing. It seems the mention of dentistry has got his attention. Up at the other end of the avenue, and Glokta pointed roughly northwards, in one of the most expensive parts of town, opposite the public gardens, in a beautiful white house in the very shadow of the Agrient, is the establishment of Master Farad. You might have heard of him. Get fucked. Glokta raised his eyebrows. If only. They say that Master Farad is the finest dentist in the world. I believe he came from Gurkul originally, but he escaped the tyranny of the Emperor to join us in the Union and make a better life for himself, saving our wealthiest citizens from the terrors of bad teeth. When I came back from my own little visit to the south, my family sent me to him to see if there was anything he could do for me. Glokta smiled wide, showing the assassin the nature of the problem. Of course there wasn't. The Emperor's torturers saw to that. But he's a damn fine dentist, everyone says so. So what? Glokta let his smile fade. Down at the other end of the middle way, down near the sea, in amongst the filth and the scum and the slime of the docks, am I. The rents may be cheap hereabouts, but I feel confident that, once we have spent some time together, you will not think me any less talented than the esteemed Master Farad. It is simply that my talents lie in a different direction. The good master eases the pain of his patients, while I am a dentist. And Glokta leaned slowly forward. Of a different sort, the assassin laughed in his face. Do you think you can scare me with a bag on the head and a nasty painting? He looked round at Frost and Severard. You crowd of freaks? Do I think we scare you? The three of us? Glokta allowed himself a chuckle at that. Here you sit, alone, unarmed, and thoroughly restrained. Who knows where you are but us, or cares to know? You have no hope of deliverance, or of escape. We're all professionals here. I think you can guess what's coming, more or less. Glokta grinned a sickly grin. Of course we scare you, don't play the fool. You hide it well, I'll admit, but that can't last. The time will come soon enough, when you'll be begging to go back in the bag. You'll get nothing from me, growled the assassin, staring him straight in the eye. Nothing? Tough? A tough man, but it's easy to act tough before the work begins. I should know. Glokta rubbed his leg gently. The blood was flowing nicely now, the pain almost gone. We'll keep it simple to begin with. Names, them's all I want for now. Just names. Why don't we start with yours? At least you can't tell us you don't know the answer. They waited. Severard and Frost stared down at the prisoner, the green eyes smiling, the pink ones not. Silence. Glokta sighed. Right then, Frost planted his fists on either side of the assassin's jaw, started to squeeze until his teeth were forced apart. Severard shoved the ends of the tongs in between and forced his jaws open, much too wide for comfort. The assassin's eyes bulged. "Hurts, doesn't it? But that's nothing. Believe me. Watch his tongue," said Glokta. "We want him talking. Don't worry," muttered Severard, peering into the assassin's mouth. He ducked back suddenly. "Ah, his breath smells like shit. A shame, but I am hardly surprised. Clean living is rarely a priority for hired killers." Glokta got slowly to his feet, limped round the table. "Now then," he murmured, one hand hovering over his instruments. "Where to begin?" He picked up a mounted needle and craned forward. His other hand gripped tight around the top of his cane, probing carefully at the killer's teeth. Not a pretty set, to be sure. I do believe I'd rather have my teeth than his. Dear me, these are in a terrible state. Rotten through and through. That's why your breath stinks so badly. There's no excuse for it. A man of your age. "Ha ha!" yelped the prisoner as Glokta touched a nerve. He tried to speak, but with the tongs in place he made less sense than practical frost. "Quiet now. You've had your chance to talk. Perhaps you'll get another later. I haven't decided." Glokta put the needle back down on the table, shaking his head sadly. "Your teeth are a fucking disgrace. Revolting. I do declare that they're just about falling out on their own. Do you know," he said, as he took the little hammer and chisel from the table, "I do believe you'd be better off without them." Chapter 4, Flatheads. Gray morning time, out in the cold, wet woods, and the dogman was just sat there, thinking about how things used to be better. Sat there, minding the spit, turning it round every once in a while and trying not to get too nervous with the waiting. Tolduru wasn't helping any with that. He was striding up and down the grass, round the old stones and back, wearing his great boots out, about as patient as a wolf on heat. Dogman watched him stomping clomp, clomp, clomp. He'd learned a long time ago that great fighters are only good for one thing, fighting. At pretty much everything else, and at waiting in particular, they're fucking useless. "Why don't you sit yourself down, Tol?" muttered Dogman. "There's stones aplenty for the purpose, warmer here by the fire and all. Rest those flapping feet of yours, you're getting me twitchy." "Sit me down," rumbled the giant, coming up and looming over the dogman like a great bloody house. "How can I sit, or you either?" He frowned across the ruins and into the trees from under his great heavy brows. "You sure this is the place?" "This is the place." Dogman stared round at the broken stones, hoping like hell that it was. He couldn't deny there was no sign of 'em yet. "They'll be here, don't you worry. So long as they ain't all got themselves killed," he thought, but he had the sense not to say it. He'd spent enough time marching with Tolduru Thunderhead to know you don't get that man stirred up. Unless you want a broken head, of course. They better be here soon as all. Tull's bloody great hands curled up into fists fit to break rocks with. "I got no taste for just sitting here, arse in the wind." "Nor do I, neither," said the dogman, showing his palms and doing his best to keep everything gentle. "But don't you fret on it, big lad. They'll be along soon enough, just the way we planned. This is the place." He eyed the hog crackling away, dripping some nice gravy in the fire. His mouth was watering good now. His nose was full of the smell of meat, and something else beside, just a whiff. He looked up, sniffing. "You smell something?" asked Toll, peering into the woods. "Something, maybe." The dogman leaned down and took a hold on his bow. "What is it? Shanka? Not sure, could be." He sniffed the air again. Smelled like a man, and a mighty sour-smelling one at that. "I could have killed the fucking pair of you." Dogman span about, half falling over and near fumbling his bow while he did it. Black Dow wasn't 10 strides behind him, downwind, creeping over to the fire with a nasty grin. Grim was at his shoulder, face blank as a wall, as always. "You bastards," bellowed Tall. "You near made me shit with your sneaking around." "Good," sneered Dow. "You could lose some fucking lard." Dogman took a long breath and tossed his bow back down, some relief to know they were in the right spot after all, but he could have done without the scare. He'd been jumpy since he saw Logen go over the edge of that cliff. Roll right on over and not a thing anyone could do about it. Could happen to anyone anytime. Death, and that was a fact. Grim clambered over the broken stones and sat himself down on one next to the dogman. Gave him the barest of nods. Meat? Barked Dow, shoving past Tool and flopping down beside the fire, ripping a leg off the carcass and tearing into it with his teeth. And that was it. That was all the greeting, after a month or more apart. A man with friends is rich indeed, muttered the dogman out the corner of his mouth. What say? Spat Dow, cold eyes sliding round, his mouth full of pig, his dirty, stubbly chin, all shiny with grease. Dogman showed his palms again. Nothing to take offense at. He'd spent enough time marching with Black Dow to know you might as well cut your own neck as make that evil bastard angry. Any trouble while we was split up? He asked, looking to change the subject. Grim nodded. Some fucking flatheads, snarled Dow, spraying bits of meat in Dogman's face. They're bloody everywhere. He pointed the hog's leg across the fire like it was a blade. I've taken enough of this shit. I'm going back south. It's too bloody cold by half. And fucking flatheads everywhere. Bastards, I'm going south. You scared? Asked Tull. Dow turned to look up at him with a big yellow grin, and the dogman winced. It was a damn fool of a question, that. He'd never been scared in his life, Black Dow. Didn't know what it was to be scared. Feared of a few shunka? Me? He gave a nasty laugh. We done some work on them while you two been snoring. Gave some of 'em warm beds to sleep in. Too warm by half. Burned 'em, muttered Grim. That was a full day's talk out of 'em already. Burned a whole fucking pile of 'em, hissed Dow, grinning like he never heard such a joke as corpses on fire. They don't scare me, big lad. No more'n you do. But I don't plan to sit here waiting for 'em neither, just so Three Trees has time to haul his flabby old arse out of bed. I'm going south. And he tore off another mouthful of meat. Who's got the flabby arse now? Dogman cracked a grin as he saw Three Trees striding over towards the fire, and he started up and grabbed the old boy by the hand. He had Forley the weakest with him and all, and Dogman clapped the little man on the back as he came past. Nearly knocked him over. He was that pleased to see they were all alive and made it through another month. Didn't hurt to have some leadership round the fire neither. Everyone looked happy for once, smiling and pressing hands and all the rest. Everyone but Dow, of course. He just sat there, staring at the fire, sucking on his bone, face sour as old milk. Right good to see you again, lads, and all in one piece. Three Trees hefted his big round shield off his shoulder and leant it up against a broken old bit of wall. How've you been? Fucking cold, said Dow, not even looking up. We're going south. Dogman sighed. Back together for 10 heartbeats and the bickering was already started. It was going to be a tough crowd now, without Logen to keep things settled. A tough crowd and apt to get bloody. Three Trees wasn't rushing into anything, though. He took a moment to think on it, like always. He loved to take his moment, that one. That was what made him so dangerous. Going south, eh? Said Three Trees after Head chewed it over for a minute. And just when did all this get decided? Nothing's decided, said the dogman, showing his palms one more time. He reckoned he might be doing that a lot from now on. Tulduru frowned down at Dow's back. Nothing at all, he rumbled, mightily annoyed at having his mind made up for him. Dow took no time at all to think about that. He never took time, that one. That was what made him so dangerous. He leaped up, flinging the bone onto the ground, squaring up to Three Trees with a fighting look. I'd say south, he snarled, eyes bulging like bubbles on a stew. Three Trees didn't back down a step. That wouldn't have been his way at all. He took his moment to think on it. Course, then he took a step forward of his own, so his nose and Dow's were almost touching. If you wanted to say, you should have beaten Ninefingers, he growled, instead of losing like the rest of us. Black Dow's face turned dark as tar at that. He didn't like being reminded of losing. The bloody Nine's gone back to the mud, he snarled. Dogman seen it, didn't you? Dogman had to nod. Aye, he muttered. So that's the end of that. There's no reason for us to be pissing around here north of the mountains with flatheads crawling up our arses. I say south. Ninefingers may be dead, said Three Trees in Dow's face, but your debt ain't. Why he saw fit to spare a man as worthless as you will never know, but he named me as second, and he tapped his big chest, and that means I'm the one with the say. Me and no other. Dogman took a careful step back. The two of 'em were shaping up for blows, all right, and he'd no wish to get a bloody nose in all the confusion. It would hardly have been the first time. Forley took a stab at keeping the peace. "Come on, boys," he said, all nice and soft. "There's no need for this." He might not have been much at killing Forley, but he was a damn good boy for stopping those that were from killing each other. Dogman wished him luck with it. "Come on. Why don't you shut your fucking hole, you?" growled Dow, one dirty finger stabbing savage in Forley's face. "What's your fucking say worth weakest? Leave him be," rumbled Tull, holding his great fist up under Dow's chin. "Or I'll give you something to shout about." The Dogman could hardly look. Dow and Three Trees were always picking at each other. They got fired up quick and damped down quick. The Thunderhead was a different animal. Once that big ox got properly riled, there was no calming him. Not without 10 strong men and a lot of rope. Dogman tried to think what Logen would have done. He'd have known how to stop him fighting if he hadn't been dead. "Shit!" shouted Dogman, jumping up from the fire all of a sudden. "There's fucking Shanka crawling all over us, and if we get through with them, there's always Bethod to think on. We've a world full of scores to settle without making more ourselves. Logen's gone and Three Trees is second, and that's the only say I'll hear." He did some jabbing with his own finger at no one in particular. Then he waited, hoping like hell that it had done the trick. "Aye," grunted Grim. Forley started nodding like a woodpecker. "Dogman's right. We need to fight each other like we need the cock rot. Three Trees is second. He's the chief now." It was quiet for a moment, and Dow fixed the Dogman with that cold, empty killing look, like the cat with the mouse between its paws. Dogman swallowed. A lot of men, most men even, wouldn't have dared meet no look like that from Black Dow. He got the name from having the blackest reputation in the north, with coming sudden in the black of night, and leaving the villages behind him black from fire. That was the rumor. That was the fact. It took all the bones Dogman had not to stare at his boots. He was just ready to do it when Dow looked away, eyed the others, one at a time. Most men wouldn't have met that look, but these here weren't most men. You could never have hoped to meet a bloodier crowd. Not anywhere under the sun. Not a one of them backed down, or even seemed to consider it. Apart from Forley the weakest, of course. He was staring at the grass before his turn even came. Once Dow saw they were all against him, he cracked a happy smile, just as if there never was a problem. "Fair enough," he said to Three Trees, the anger all seeming to drain away in an instant. "What's it to be then, Chief?" Three Trees looked over at the woods. He sniffed and sucked at his teeth. He scratched at his beard, taking his moment to think on it. He looked each one of them over, considering. "We go south," he said. He smelled them before he saw 'em, but that was always the way with him. He had a good nose, did the Dogman. That's how he got the name after all. Being honest, though, anyone could have smelled 'em. They fucking stank. There were 12 down in the clearing, sitting, eating, grunting to each other in their nasty, dirty tongue, big yellow teeth sticking out everywhere, dressed in lumps of smelly fur and reeking hide and odd bits of rusty armor. "Shanka! Fucking flatheads!" Dogman muttered to himself. He heard a soft hiss behind, turned round to see Grim peering up from behind a bush. He held out his open hand to say stop, tapped the top of his skull to say flatheads, held up his fist, then 2 fingers to say 12, and pointed back down the track towards the others. Grim nodded and faded away into the woods. The Dogmen took one last look at the Shanka, just to make sure they were all still unwary. They were, so he slipped back down the tree and off. "They're camped round the road. 12 that I saw, maybe more. They looking for us?" asked Three Trees. "Maybe, but they ain't looking too hard." "Could we get around them?" asked Forley, always looking to miss out on a fight. Dow spat onto the ground, always looking to get into one. 12 is nothing. We can do them all right." The Dogman looked over at Three Trees, thinking it out, taking his moment. 12 wasn't nothing, and they all knew it. But it might be better to deal with them than leave them free and easy behind. "What's it to be, Chief?" asked Tull. Three Trees set his jaw. "Weapons. A fighting man's a fool that don't keep his weapons clean and ready." Dogman had been over his no more'n an hour before. "Still, you won't be killed for checking him, while you might be for not doing it." There was the hissing of steel on leather, the clicking of wood, and the clanking of metal. Dogman watched Grim twang at his bowstring, check over the feathers on his shafts. He watched Tull Duru run his thumb down the edge of his big heavy sword, almost as tall as Forley was, clucking like a chicken at a spot of rust. He watched Black Dow rubbing a rag on the head of his axe, looking at the blade with eyes soft as a lover's. He watched Three Trees tugging at the buckles on his shield straps, swishing his blade through the air, bright metal glinting. The dogman gave a sigh, pulled the straps on his guard tighter round his left wrist, checked the wood of his bow for cracks. He made sure all his knives were where they should be. You can never have too many knives, Logen had told him once, and he'd taken it right to heart. He watched Forley checking his short sword with clumsy hands, his mouth chewing away, eyes all wet with fear. That got his own nerves jumping, and he glanced round at the others. Dirty, scarred, frowns and lots of beard. There was no fear there, no fear at all. But that was nothing to be shamed at. Different men have different ways, Logen had told him once, and you have to have fear to have courage. He'd taken that right to heart as well. He walked over to Forley and gave him a clap on the shoulder. You have to have fear to have courage, he said. That so? So they say. And it's a good thing, too. The dogman leaned close so no one else could hear, 'cause I'm about ready to shit. He reckoned that's what Logen would have done, and now that Logen had gone back to the mud, it fell to him. Forley gave half a smile, but it slumped pretty fast, and he looked more scared than ever. There's only so much you can do. Right, boys, said Three Trees. Once the gear was all checked and stowed in its proper places. Here's how we'll get it done. Grim dogmen, opposite sides of their camp, out in the trees. Wait for the signal, then shoot any flathead with a bow. Failing that, whatever's closest. Right you are, Chief, said the dogman. Grim gave a nod. Toll, you and Mel take the front. But wait for the signal, eh? Aye, rumbled the giant. Dow, you and Forley at the back. You come on when you see us go, but this time you wait for us to go, hissed Three Trees, stabbing with his thick finger. Course, Chief. Dow shrugged his shoulders, just as though he always did as he was told. Right then, there it is, said Three Trees. Anyone still confused? Any empty heads around the fire? The dogman mumbled and shook his head. They all did. Fair enough. Just one more thing. The old boy leaned forward, looking at each of them one by one. Wait for the fucking signal. It wasn't till the dogman was hid behind a bush with his bow in his hand and a shaft at the ready that he realized. He'd no idea what the signal was. He looked down at the shunka, still sat there all unwary, grunting and shouting and banging about. By the dead he needed to piss. Always needed to piss before a fight. Had anyone said the signal? He couldn't remember. Shit, he whispered. And just then Dow came hurtling out from the trees, axe in one hand, sword in the other. Fucking flatheads, he screamed, giving the nearest a fearsome big blow in the head and splattering blood across the clearing. Insofar as you could tell what a shunka was thinking, these ones looked greatly surprised. Dogman reckoned that would have to do for a signal. He let loose his shaft at the nearest flathead, just reaching for a big club, and watched it catch it through the armpit with a satisfying thunk. Ha! He shouted. He saw Dow spit another through the back with his sword, but there was a big shunka now with a spear ready to throw. An arrow came looping out of the trees and stuck it through the neck, and it let go a squeal and sprawled out backwards. That Grim was a damn good shot. Now Three Trees came roaring from the scrub on the other side of the clearing, catching them off guard. He barged one flat head in the back with his shield, and it sprawled face first into the fire. He hacked at another with his sword. The dogman let go a shaft, and it stuck a shunka in its gut. It dropped down on its knees, and a moment later Tull took its head off with a great swing of his sword. The fight was joined and moving quick chop, grunt, scrape, rattle. There was blood flying and weapons swinging and bodies dropping too fast for the dogman to try an arrow at. The three of them had the last few hemmed in, squawking and gibbering. Tull Duru was swinging his big sword around, keeping them at bay. Three Trees darted in and chopped the legs out from under one, and Dow cut another down as it looked round. The last one squawked and made a run for the trees. Dogman shot at it, but he was hurrying, and he missed. The arrow almost hit Dow in the leg, but luckily he didn't notice. It had almost got away into the bushes, then it squealed and fell back, thrashing. Forley had stabbed it, hiding in the scrub. I got one, he yelled. It was quiet for a moment, while the dogmen scrambled down toward the clearing, and they all looked round to see if there was anything left to fight. Then Black Dow gave a great bellow, shaking his bloody weapons over his head. We fucking killed him! You nearly killed us all, you damn fool, shouted Three Trees. Eh? What about the fucking signal? I thought I heard you shout. I never. Did you not? Asked Dow, looking greatly puzzled. What was the signal anyhow? Three Trees gave a sigh and put his head in his hands. Forley was still staring down at his sword. I got one, he said again. Now that the fight was over, the Dogman was about ready to burst, so he turned round and pissed against a tree. We killed him, shouted Tull, clapping him on the back. Watch out, yelled Dogman as piss went all down his leg. They all had a laugh at him over that. Even Grim had himself a little chuckle. Tull shook Three Trees by the shoulder. We killed him, Chief. We killed these, he said, looking sour. But there'll be plenty more. Thousands of them. They won't be happy staying up here neither. Up here beyond the mountains. Sooner or later they'll be going south. Maybe in the summer. When the pass is clear, maybe later. But it's not long off. The Dogman glanced at the others, all shifty and worried after that little speech. The glow of victory hadn't lasted too long. It never did. He looked round at the dead flatheads on the ground, broken and bloody, sprawled and crumpled. It seemed a hollow little victory they'd had now. Shouldn't we try and tell him, Three Trees? He asked. Shouldn't we try and warn someone? Aye. Three Trees gave a sad little smile. But who? Chapter 5. The course of true love. Jezal trudged miserably across the grey agrient with his fencing steels in his hand. Yawning, stumbling, grumbling, still horribly sore from his endless run the day before. He hardly saw anyone as he dragged himself to his daily bullying from Lord Marshal Varus. Apart from the odd premature tweeting of some bird in amongst the gables and the tired scraping of his own reluctant boots, all was quiet. No one was up at this time. No one should be up at this time. Him least of all. He hauled his aching legs through the archway and up the tunnel. The sun was barely above the horizon, and the courtyard beyond was full of deep shadows. Squinting into the darkness, he could see Varus sat at the table, waiting for him. Damn it. He had hoped to be early for once. Did the old bastard sleep at all? Lord Marshal, shouted Jezal, breaking into a half-hearted jog. No, not today. A shiver crept up Jezal's neck. It was not the voice of his fencing master, but there was something unpleasantly familiar about it. Marshal Varus is busy with more important matters this morning. Inquisitor Glokta was sitting in the shadows by the table and smiling up with his revolting gap-toothed grin. Jezal's skin prickled with disgust. It was hardly what one needed first thing in the morning. He slowed to a reluctant walk and stopped next to the table. You will doubtless be pleased to learn that there will be no running, or swimming, or beam, or heavy bar today, said the cripple. You won't even be needing those. He waved his cane at Jezal's fencing steels. We will just be having a little chat, that is all. The idea of 5 punishing hours with Varus seemed suddenly very appealing, but Jezal was not about to show his discomfort. He tossed his steels onto the table with a loud rattle and sat down carelessly in the other chair, Glokta regarding him from the shadows all the while. Jezal had it in mind to stare him into some kind of submission, but it proved a vain attempt. After a couple of seconds looking at that wasted face, that empty grin, those fever-bright sunken eyes, he began to find the tabletop most interesting. So tell me, Captain, why did you take up fencing? A game, then. A private hand of cards with only 2 players, and everything that was said would get back to Varus, that was sure. Jezal would have to play his hand carefully, keep his cards close and his wits about him. For my own honor, for that of my family, for that of my king, he said coldly. The cripple could try and find fault with that answer. Ah, so it's for the benefit of your nation that you put yourself through this. What a fine citizen you must be. What selflessness. What an example to us all. Glokta snorted. Please, if you must lie, at least pick a lie that you yourself find convincing. That answer is an insult to us both. How dare this toothless husband take that tone with him? Jezal's legs gave a twitch. He was right on the point of getting up and walking away. Varus and his hideous stooge be damned. But he caught the cripple's eye as he put his hands on the arms of the chair to push himself up. Glokta was smiling at him, a mocking sort of smile. To leave would be to admit defeat somehow. Why did he take up fencing anyway? My father wanted me to do it. So. My heart brims with sympathy. The loyal son, bound by his strong sense of duty, is forced to fulfill his father's ambitions. A familiar tale, like a comfortable old chair we all love to sit in. Tell 'em what they want to hear, eh? A better answer, but just as far from the truth. Why don't you tell me then? Snapped Jezal sulkily. Since you seem to know so much about it. All right, I will. Men don't fence for their king, or for their families, or for the exercise either before you try that one on me. They fence for the recognition, for the glory. They fence for their own advancement. They fence for their own advancement. I should know. You should know? Jezal snorted. It hardly seems to have worked in your case. He regretted it immediately. Damn his mouth, it got him in all kinds of trouble. But Glokta only flashed his disgusting smile again. It was working well enough, until I found my way into the Emperor's prisons. What's your excuse, liar? Jezal didn't like the way this conversation was going. He was too used to easy victories at the card table, and poor players. His skills had dulled. Better to sit this one out until he got the measure of his new opponent. He clamped his jaw shut and said nothing. It takes hard work, of course, winning a contest. You should have seen our mutual friend Colum West working. He sweated at it for months, running around while the rest of us laughed at him. A jumped-up idiot commoner competing with his betters, that's what we all thought. Blundering through his forms, stumbling about on the beam, being made a fool of, again and again, day after day. But look at him now. Glokta tapped his cane with a finger. And look at me. Seems he had the last laugh, Captain. Just shows what you can achieve with a little hard work. You've twice the talent he had, and the right blood. You don't have to work 1/10 so hard, but you refuse to work at all. Jezal wasn't about to let that one pass. Not work at all? Don't I put myself through this torture, everyday torture? Asked Glokta sharply. Jezal realized too late his unfortunate choice of words. Well, he mumbled, I know more than a little about both fencing and torture. Believe me when I say, and the Inquisitor's grotesque grin grew wider still, that they're two quite different things. There, said Jezal, still off balance. You have the ambitions, and the means to realize them. A little effort would do it. A few months' hard work, then you would probably never need to try at anything again in your life, if that's what you want. A few short months, and you're set. Glokta licked at his empty gums. Barring accidents, of course. It's a great chance you've been offered. I'd take it if I was you, but I don't know. Maybe you're a fool as well as a liar. I'm no fool, said Jezal coldly. It was the best he could do. Glokta raised an eyebrow, then winced, leaning heavily on his cane as he slowly pushed himself to his feet. Give it up if you like. By all means, sit around for the rest of your days and drink and talk shit with the rest of the junior officers. There are a lot of people who'd be more than happy to live that life. A lot of people who haven't had the chances you've had. Give it up. Lord Marshal Varus will be disappointed, and Major West and your father and so on, but please believe me when I say, and he leaned down, still smiling his horrible smile, that I couldn't care less. Good day, Captain Luthar. And Glokta limped off toward the archway. After that less than delightful interview, Jezal found himself with a few hours of unexpected free time on his hands. But he was scarcely in the frame of mind to enjoy it. He wandered the empty streets, squares and gardens of the Agrient, thinking grimly on what the cripple had said to him, cursing the name of Glokta, but unable to quite push the conversation from his mind. He turned it over and over, every phrase, constantly coming up with new things that he should have said. If only he had thought of them at the time. Ah, Captain Luthar. Jezal started and looked up. A man he did not recognize was sitting on the dewy grass beneath a tree, smiling up at him, a half-eaten apple in his hand. The early morning is the perfect time for a stroll, I find. Calm and gray and clean and empty. It's nothing like the gaudy pinkness of evening time. All that clutter, all those people coming and going. How can one think in amongst all that nonsense? And now I see you are of the same mind. How delightful. He took a big crunching bite out of the apple. Do I know you? Oh no, said the stranger, getting to his feet and brushing some dirt from the seat of his trousers. Not yet. My name is Sulfur, Yorus Sulfur. Really? And what brings you to the Agrient? You might say, I have come on a diplomatic mission. Jezal looked him over, trying to place his origin. A mission from? From my master, of course, said Sulphur unhelpfully. His eyes were different colors, Jezal noticed. An ugly and off-putting characteristic, he rather thought. And your master is? A very wise and powerful man. He stripped the core with his teeth and tossed it away into the bushes, wiping his hands on the front of his shirt. I see you've been fencing. Jezal glanced down at his steels. Yes, he said, realizing that he had finally come to a decision, but for the last time. I'm giving it up. Oh dear me, no. The strange man seized Jezal by the shoulder. Oh dear me, no, you mustn't. What? No, no. My master would be horrified if he knew. Horrified. Give up fencing, and you give up more than that. This is how one comes to the notice of the public, you see. They decide, in the end, there's no nobility without the commoners, no nobility at all. They decide. What? Jezal glanced around the park, hoping to catch sight of a guard so he could notify him that a dangerous madman was loose in the Agrient. No, you mustn't give it up. I won't hear of it. No, indeed. I'm sure that you'll stick with it after all. You must. Jezal shook Sulphur's hand off his shoulder. Who are you? Sulphur, Yoru Sulphur, at your service. See you again, Captain. At the contest, if not before. And he waved over his shoulder as he strolled off. Jezal stared after him, mouth slightly open. Damn it, he shouted, throwing his steels down on the grass. Everyone seemed to want to take a hand in his business today, even crazy strangers in the park. As soon as he thought it was late enough, Jezal went to call on Major West. You could always be sure of a sympathetic ear with him, and Jezal was hoping that he might be able to manipulate his friend into breaking the bad news to Lord Marshal Varus. That was a scene that he wanted no part of, if he could possibly avoid it. He knocked on the door and waited. He knocked again. The door opened. Captain Luthar. What an almost unbearable honor. Ah, day, muttered Jezal, somewhat surprised to find her here. It's good to see you again. For once he actually meant it. She was interesting, is what she was. It was a new and refreshing thing for him to actually be interested in what a woman had to say. And she was damn good-looking, too. There was no denying it, and seemed prettier every time he saw her. Nothing could ever happen between them, of course, what with West being his friend and all, but there was no harm in looking, was there? Is your brother around? She threw herself carelessly down onto the settle against the wall, one leg stretched out, looking very sour. He's out. Gone out. Always busy. Much too busy for me. There was a definite flush to her cheek. Jezal's eye lighted on the decanter. The stopper was out and the wine was halfway down. Are you drunk? Somewhat. She squinted at a half-full wine glass at her elbow. But mostly I'm just bored. It's not even 10. Can't I be bored before 10? You know what I mean. Leave the moralizing to my brother. It suits him better. And have a drink. She waved her hand at the bottle. You look like you need one. Well, that was true enough. He poured himself a glass and sat down in a chair facing Adi while she regarded him with heavy-lidded eyes. She took her own glass from the table. There was a thick book lying next to it, face down. How's the book? Asked Jezal. The Fall of the Master Maker in 3 volumes. They say it's one of the great classics of history. Lot of boring rubbish. She snorted derisively. Full of wise magi, stern knights with mighty swords and ladies with mightier bosoms. Magic, violence, and romance, in equal measure. Utter shit. She slapped the book off the table and it tumbled onto the carpet. Pages flapping. There must be something you can find to keep busy. Really? What would you suggest? My cousins do a lot of embroidery. Fuck yourself. Said Jezal, smiling. The swearing no longer seemed half so offensive as it had done when they first met. What did you do at home in England? Oh, home. Her head dropped against the back of the settle. I thought I was bored there. I could hardly wait to come here to the bright center of things. Now I can hardly wait to go back. Marry some farmer. Have a dozen brats. At least I'd get some conversation that way. She closed her eyes and sighed. But Cullum won't let me. He feels responsible, now that our father's dead, thinks it's too dangerous. He'd rather I didn't get slaughtered by the Northmen, but that's about where his sense of responsibility ends. It certainly doesn't extend to spending 10 minutes together with me. So it looks like I'm stuck here with all you arrogant snobs. Jezal shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He seems to manage. Oh, yes, snorted R.D. Column West. Shame about that upstart sister of his, though. Too clever by half. And they say she drinks, she whispered. Doesn't know her place. Total disgrace. Best just to ignore her. She sighed again. Yes, the sooner I go home, the happier everyone will be. I won't be happier. Damn, did he say that out loud? Artie laughed, none too pleasantly. Well, it's enormously noble of you to say so. Why aren't you fencing anyway? Marshal Varus was busy today. He paused for a moment. In fact, I had your friend Sandan Glokta as fencing master this morning. Really? What did he have to say for himself? Various things. He called me a fool. Imagine that. Jezal frowned. Yes. Well, I'm as bored with fencing as you are with that book. That was what I wanted to talk to your brother about. I'm thinking of giving it up. She burst out laughing, snorting, gurgling peals of it. Her whole body was shaking. Wine sloshed out of her glass and splattered across the floor. What's so funny? He demanded. It's just... She wiped a tear from her eye. I had a bet with Colum. He was sure you'd stick at it, and now I'm 10 marks richer. I'm not sure that I like being the subject of your bet, said Jezal sharply. I'm not sure I give a damn. This is serious. No, it isn't, she snapped. For my brother, it was serious. He had to do it. No one even notices you if you don't have a Dan in your name, and who'd know better than me? You're the only person who's given me the time of day since I got here, and then only because Colum made you. I've precious little money and no blood at all, and that makes me less than nothing to the likes of you. The men ignore me, and the women cut me dead. I've got nothing here. Nothing and no one. And you think you've got the hard life? Please. I might take up fencing, she said bitterly. Ask the Lord Marshal if he has space for a pupil, would you? At least, then, I'd have someone to talk to. Jezal blinked. That wasn't interesting. That was rude. Hold on. You've no idea what it's like to... Oh, stop whinging. How old are you? 5. Why don't you go back to sucking on your mother's tit, infant? He could hardly believe what he was hearing. How dare she? My mother's dead, he said. That should make her feel guilty. Squeeze an apology out of her. It didn't. Dead? Lucky her. At least she doesn't have to listen to your damn whining. You spoiled little rich boys are all the same. You get everything you could possibly want, then throw a tantrum because you have to pick it up yourself. You're pathetic. You make me fucking sick. Jezal goggled. His face was burning, stinging as if it had been slapped. He'd rather have been slapped. He had never been spoken to like that in his life. Never. It was worse than Glokta, much worse and far more unexpected. He realized his mouth was hanging half open. He snapped it shut, grinding his teeth together, slapped his glass down on the table, and got up to leave. He was turning to the door when it suddenly opened, leaving him and Major West staring at each other. Jezal, said West, looking at first simply surprised, and then, as he glanced over at his sister, sprawling on the settle, slightly suspicious. What are you doing here? I came to see you actually. Oh yes? Yes? But it can wait. I've things to do. And Jezal pushed past his friend and out into the corridor. What was all that about? He heard West saying as he strode away from the room. Are you drunk? With every step, Jezal's fury mounted until he was halfway to being strangled by it. He had been the victim of an assault, a savage and undeserved attack. He stopped in the corridor, trembling with rage, his breath snorting in his nose like he'd run 10 miles. His fists clenched painfully tight. And from a woman, too! A woman! How dare she? He had wasted time on her, and laughed at her jokes, and found her attractive. She should have been honored to be noticed. That fucking bitch, he snarled to himself. He had half a mind to go back and say it to her face, but it was too late. He stared around for something to hit. How to pay her back? How? Then it came to him. Prove her wrong. That would do it. Prove her wrong. And that crippled bastard Glokta, too. He'd show them how hard he could work. He'd show them he was no fool, no liar, no spoiled child. The more he thought about it, the more it made sense. He'd win this damn contest is what he'd do. That wiped the smiles off their faces. He set off briskly down the corridor, with a strange new feeling building in his chest. A sense of purpose. That was what it was. Perhaps it wasn't too late for a run. That's it for today's video. The next part arrives tomorrow. Subscribe so you don't miss it.